Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 1 of our story. If you like this What If story and want to see part 2, let me know in the comments below. Before we start, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Also, check the description for more great content and my playlist. This story was posted by Birdman53 on Wattpad. Now let's start. It all began when Izuku was just 5 years old. He was in preschool, watching as his friends began to develop their quirks while he waited for his own to appear. One night, everything changed. He sat with his mother, enjoying their usual routine of watching TV before bedtime. Laughter filled the air as he looked up at her, and that's when he noticed the orbs floating around her, each one a different color. Curiosity got the better of him, and he reached for a black orb that was closest to him. As he touched it, he heard his mother scream, and suddenly, everything went dark. When the darkness faded, they were in his mother's room. Confused, he wondered how they had moved from the couch. His gaze shifted to his mother, who stood in the doorway, tears in her eyes, staring at his father, who lay in bed with another woman. His father, with a blank expression, broke the silence. The tension in the air was palpable until his mother uttered 2 words that shattered Izuku's world. "Get out." Everything turned black again, and he found himself back on the couch, bewildered. He looked over at his mother, who was now crying, her knees drawn up to her chin. Concerned, he reached out to her, asking if everything was all right. In a sudden turn, his mother's hand struck him, sending him to the floor. He stared up at her, tears welling in his eyes, unable to understand what had just happened. She had never hit him before. Confusion and hurt filled his heart as he wondered why she had reacted that way. His mother, filled with regret, apologized, but as she reached for him, he scrambled to his room and locked the door behind him. Tears streamed down his face as he questioned everything. Why had she told his father to leave? Why had she struck him? What were those orbs? Were they a quirk? Overwhelmed, he cried himself to sleep. 10 years passed since that night, yet the memories remained vivid. A week after the incident, they visited a doctor, and it was revealed that his quirk had manifested. What should have been a joyous occasion turned painful. His quirk, named Traumatize, allowed him to see orbs around people, each color representing the severity of their memories. The colors ranged from yellow, blue, purple, red, to black, with black indicating the most traumatic experiences. When he touched an orb, he and anyone in contact with him were transported into that memory, forced to relive it. He could alter the memories, but only to make them worse. On the ride home, he learned that the woman with his father was an affair partner, and his father had been kicked out, never to return. His heart shattered once more, and he wished he had remained quirkless. For the next 7 years, communication between him and his mother dwindled. Meals were silent, and they often retreated to their separate rooms. He lived as if he had no quirk, enduring harassment and bullying daily. Each night, his thoughts tormented him, leading him to tears. Middle school brought even more challenges. The voices in his head grew louder, taunting him with feelings of worthlessness. One night, overwhelmed, he punched a mirror, the glass shattering and cutting his knuckles. As the pain subsided, the voices quieted, bringing him a fleeting sense of peace. Weeks later, his mother was admitted to a mental hospital, deemed unstable from the trauma of her past. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐃𝐞𝐭𝐚𝐢𝐥𝐬 became his legal guardian, allowing him to stay in his mother's apartment. For a year, he lived alone with his thoughts, battling the incessant voices that only quieted when he resorted to self-harm or drinking. Despite the darkness surrounding him, he still aspired to be a hero, someone who could help others avoid the same fate. Reluctantly, he dedicated his first year of middle school to understanding his quirk at home, determined to gain control. He discovered that he didn't randomly select memories, each orb bore a description once he became familiar with it. This newfound knowledge brought him some comfort. At school, he masked his pain with a smile, using headphones to drown out the negativity. Music became his refuge, allowing him to escape into its rhythms. He spent hours researching how to create beats and the necessary equipment. After months of saving his allowance, he finally purchased a soundboard with a keyboard attachment. For the first time in years, he felt happiness as he immersed himself in music, often losing sleep in the process. Soon, staying awake during class became increasingly difficult, and one day, exhaustion overwhelmed me, causing me to faint. When I regained consciousness, I found myself in the nurse's office, where Aunt Mitsuki was looking down at me. Despite her tone, she wasn't angry. Rather, she appeared sad and disappointed. I had braced myself for a lecture, but instead, she simply looked at me and expressed her regret. My confusion deepened when I noticed her gaze shift to my arms. The underside of both forearms bore numerous cuts and scars. The nurse left us alone for a moment, likely to inform my teacher and the principal, though I doubted they would care. To them, I was just a quirkless kid with no future. Aunt Mitsuki spent the next hour asking questions and trying to persuade me to come stay with her and her family. Most of her inquiries were met with my silence. Eventually, we reached an agreement. I could remain independent, but she would check on me weekly, and I would attend therapy for the remainder of the year. I pleaded with Aunt Mitsuki not to inform Bakugo about my situation. She hesitated but ultimately agreed, although she would confide in her husband, needing someone to share this burden with. That night, she drove me home and inspected the house, surprised by its cleanliness. Only a few dirty dishes were in the sink, and the living room was tidy. However, she noticed that all the pictures were either lying flat or turned around. She chose not to press me for an explanation. Next, she examined my room, which was a chaotic mess. The bed was unmade, and clothes were strewn everywhere. I knew I needed to tidy up, but I questioned the point since it would only get messy again. Before leaving, she spotted my soundboard. I explained that music provided comfort and helped me feel less alone in the house. As she departed, she mentioned she would return sometime next week, keeping the exact day a surprise so I couldn't hide anything. The last half of the year felt interminable. I attended therapy every other week, with Aunt Mitsuki accompanying me to better understand my struggles. I often thought to myself that no one could truly grasp what I was experiencing. During my first week at therapy, the therapist handed me a 𝗟𝗶𝗸 band. Initially confused, I listened as he explained that whenever the voices became overwhelming and music couldn't soothe them, I should snap the band. He believed it would help reduce my urge to harm myself. While he saw it as a coping mechanism, to me, it was merely a temporary distraction until I returned home. I had to be more strategic about where I inflicted my cuts, opting for less visible areas. Occasionally, I was obliged to have dinner at the Bakugo household, forcing a smile while I snapped the 𝗟𝗶𝗸 band throughout the evening. Fortunately, the school year ended, and I managed to exit therapy by telling them what they wanted to hear and maintaining a facade of happiness. I felt invisible, just a quirkless outcast. As the first day of my second year in middle school arrived, my routine remained unchanged. I woke up, took a shot of whiskey, and made 3 new cuts. After showering to wash away the remnants of my actions, I headed to school. With my headphones in, I sat down, silently hoping that Bakugo wouldn't be in my class. Unfortunately, fate had other plans as he walked in. Bakugo greeted me with his usual taunt, and I looked up, hiding my hands beneath the desk while forcing a smile. The class dragged on as everyone introduced themselves and shared their quirks, immediately marking me as an outsider. Thankfully, the teacher was indifferent, allowing me to retreat into my music once more. When lunch arrived, I avoided the cafeteria and made my way to the roof, seeking solace in the quiet. The remainder of the day felt endless. I longed for the bell to ring so I could escape. During the last half of the day, I pulled out my notebook and jotted down ideas for beats. Finally, the bell rang, signaling the end of the day. Bakugo called out to me, relaying a message from Aunt Mitsuki about dinner. I felt my frustration rise, wishing for a break from the mounting pressure. I packed my notebook away and left the classroom, feeling the weight of everyone's stares. I could sense their judgment, whispers about the quirkless kid who still aspired to be a hero. The 𝗟𝗶𝗸 band on my wrist felt inadequate, but it provided a small measure of calm. I glanced at my arm, noting the scars and the bright red marks from the day's snaps. The band was worn and fraying, stained with the evidence of my struggles. I knew I would need a new one when I got home. As I walked through the park, a place that once brought me joy, I spotted someone sitting on my favorite bench atop a hill. Anxiety surged within me, prompting another snap of the 𝗟𝐵𝐵 band. Taking a deep breath, I leaned against a nearby tree, turning up the volume on my music and allowing myself to fade into the rhythm. School had ended for the day, and with no assignments to rush home for, I took my time. My parents wouldn't be home for a while, granting me some freedom. Despite the overcast sky, I found the atmosphere appealing as I made my way to the nearby park. As I made my way to the top of the hill, I settled onto a bench that offered a view of the world below. I leaned back and pulled out my notebook, watching the scenery unfold around me. After a few moments, I noticed someone approaching. It was a kid who appeared to be around my age, wearing headphones and keeping his head down. He walked over to a nearby tree and leaned against it. I found it a bit odd since there was plenty of space on the bench, but I returned my focus to my notebook, tapping on it as I tried to brainstorm some lyrics. Inspiration was elusive today, which was frustrating. After a while, I leaned my head back and sighed, glancing over to see the kid still in the same spot, staring blankly at the park. Suddenly, I heard a snapping sound. I looked up, scanning the area, but saw nothing unusual. Perhaps it was just a stick breaking. Another snap caught my attention, and I quickly looked around again, but the only thing I noticed was the kid, who remained motionless. A third snap made me mutter under my breath, realizing the boy was holding a broken 𝗟𝐵𝐵 band in his hand. It seemed he had been playing with it the whole time. I hadn't realized I was staring until he began rummaging through his bag, looking anxious. Taking a chance, I approached him and gently tapped his shoulder. When he looked up, his expression was almost fearful, his emerald green eyes appearing dim. I asked if everything was all right, and he removed one of his headphones, offering a small smile and apologizing. He explained that he had been searching for something but had forgotten it, lowering his head slightly. I couldn't help but wonder why he seemed so nervous. I suggested he could join me on the bench since there was ample space, and after a moment he moved to sit on the opposite side, clutching his bag tightly. He thanked me quietly, and I nodded, returning to my notebook, tapping my pen as I struggled to find inspiration. Suddenly, I noticed him scribbling notes beside me. My curiosity got the better of me, and I leaned in without realizing it. When he noticed, he looked confused, and I quickly apologized for invading his space, trying to mask my embarrassment with a smile. He shrugged and continued writing, and after a minute, he shared that he was working on a new beat and jotting down notes to help recreate what he heard in his head. I smiled, intrigued, and asked if he made music too. He seemed surprised and asked if I did as well. I explained that music ran in my family, so I had picked it up. I inquired about what instrument he played, and he admitted he didn't play any but preferred making beats, mentioning the piano as a favorite, though he felt lost with chords. I asked if he created EDM, and he clarified that while he could, he preferred making lo-fi music. He described it as calming and easy to get lost in, then unplugged his headphones to let the music play. I leaned back and listened, appreciating his taste. When he asked about my musical abilities, I shared that I could play guitar, bass, piano, and a bit of drums, along with singing and writing. I lamented that my songwriting had been stagnant lately. He chuckled, impressed, and I downplayed my skills, mentioning that my parents were much more talented. Curious, I asked where he found his inspiration. He explained that he tried to capture moments, which was why he took so many notes. As he reached for a 𝗟𝐵𝐵 band that had fallen, I noticed a red mark on his wrist. I offered him a purple and black striped 𝗟𝐵𝐵 band from my bag, and he accepted it gratefully, quickly putting it on his wrist. A phone began to ring, interrupting the moment. He answered, saying he needed to take the call. After a brief conversation, he apologized for being late, explaining he had lost track of time at the park while talking to someone. He assured his aunt, Mitsuki, that he was on his way. Curious, she asked if everything was all right. He explained that he was supposed to be at a friend's house for dinner at 6, and it was now 20 minutes past. He felt a twinge of guilt for making her worry. As he gathered his things, he thanked her for understanding. Before he left, she asked for his name. He paused for a moment, took a deep breath, and introduced himself as Izuku Midoriya. She introduced herself as 𝐾𝐭𝐤, waving goodbye as he walked away. As he left, he snapped a 𝗟𝗶𝗸 band against his wrist, wondering if he had been too much of a bother and why his smile felt forced. The walk to Bakugo's house took about 20 minutes, and he dreaded the evening ahead. Upon arriving, he was quickly ushered inside by Aunt Mitsuki, who expressed her concern over his tardiness. He apologized, explaining that he had lost track of time while chatting. She hugged him tightly, reassuring him that she had been worried. Dinner at the Bakugo household was always a treat, as they were excellent cooks. After a lengthy discussion about school, Bakugo excused himself, and Izuku felt relieved to finally leave. However, Aunt Mitsuki caught his wrist, revealing a faint mark. She expressed her concern, but he quickly reassured her that he was fine. Feeling the weight of the evening, he excused himself, needing rest. He returned home around 9:30, feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. After a quick drink to unwind, he settled at his computer to work on music. He realized he had left his notebook by the door and retrieved it before diving into his soundboard. He searched for the perfect mellow pad, leaning back in his chair as he found a sound he liked. Hours passed as he crafted a melody that felt both melancholic and hopeful, with an acoustic guitar ringing softly in the background. Satisfied with his work, he struggled to name the piece but eventually found inspiration in a thought about a girl with purple hair. Weeks flew by, and school remained a challenge, filled with bullying and mockery about his dreams. Music became his refuge. One day, while walking home, he passed his favorite music shop and decided to stop in. The shop felt like home, filled with familiar faces who knew his passion for music. He discussed his longing for a guitar, hoping it would simplify his editing process. The prices were steep, but he decided to wait the month to save up. Meanwhile, 𝐾𝐭𝐬 was enjoying her Friday, eager for the weekend. She stretched as she walked through the streets, excited for her weekly tradition. Upon arriving at the shop, she was greeted by friends who playfully teased her about their shared love for music. She laughed, appreciating the camaraderie before stepping inside. Every Friday since starting middle school, the narrator and their parents visited a music store, where they would browse and enjoy the atmosphere. The narrator's father had a close friendship with the owner, which allowed them to receive special deals. Additionally, the parents participated in talent nights, showcasing their musical skills. Most visits involved picking up guitar picks or strings, and occasionally, they would acquire a new instrument. Time seemed to fly by in the store, making each visit feel brief. As the narrator wandered through the aisles, they spotted someone examining guitars. The figure seemed familiar, prompting the narrator to approach. Upon closer inspection, a distinctive purple and black 𝗟𝗶𝗸 band confirmed their suspicions. It was Midoriya. The narrator greeted him with a wave, and he appeared momentarily startled before turning to respond. He expressed uncertainty about whether he was allowed to handle the guitars. The narrator reassured him, wondering why he seemed so anxious. They asked if he remembered them, and Midoriya recalled their previous encounter at the park. The narrator sat down with a guitar, teasing Midoriya about his earlier claim of not being able to play. He hesitated, feeling embarrassed, but the narrator encouraged him, wanting to help him overcome his shyness. Midoriya admitted he struggled with social interactions, and the narrator found his nervousness endearing. After a brief exchange, Midoriya revealed his frustration with manually editing music notes and expressed a longing to play guitar for efficiency. The narrator offered to teach him, and after some initial awkwardness, Midoriya began to grasp the instrument. The narrator guided him through basic chords, noting how cold and rough his hands felt. As Midoriya strummed the strings, the sound was muted, but the narrator remained supportive, reminding him that practice was essential. Midoriya focused intently, trying to create a melody. After a few moments, he finally played a simple yet genuine tune, impressing the narrator. Just then, the narrator's father approached, casting a shadow over their moment. Midoriya froze, feeling the weight of the situation. The father, misunderstanding the interaction, confronted Midoriya, causing him to retreat into himself. The narrator defended Midoriya, but the tension escalated, leading to Midoriya's distress. As he hurried toward the exit, the narrator reached out, but stopped short upon seeing the tears in his eyes. Midoriya paused, filled with regret, and apologized before leaving the store in haste. Frustrated, the narrator confronted their father, questioning his behavior. The father attempted to justify his actions, insisting he was merely protective. The narrator argued that Midoriya was not a threat and expressed concern for his well-being. Feeling overwhelmed, they left the store, seeking solace at the park where they had first met Midoriya. As the narrators sat on the bench, a whirlwind of thoughts consumed them. They questioned their anger, worried about Midoriya's feelings toward music, and wondered if they would ever see him again. Meanwhile, the father spoke to the store owner, inquiring about Midoriya. The owner acknowledged that he frequented the shop, recalling how lost he appeared during his first visit while searching for soundboards. He had purchased a guitar and now visited the store about once a month, casually browsing the items. The man at the counter gazed out the window, lost in thought. The narrator asked him to keep an eye out for the visitor and to call when he returned, admitting to feeling regret about a previous encounter. Izuku felt overwhelmed as he rushed home, locking the door behind him. He dropped his belongings and headed straight to his room, berating himself for panicking. He buried his face in his pillow, feeling like a fool for the way he had acted. Doubts flooded his mind, making him feel like an outcast. A voice in his head echoed his insecurities, taunting him relentlessly. He tried to silence it, but the negativity only grew louder. He questioned why he had tried to impress someone he barely knew, and the voice reminded him that others might see him in a negative light. The pressure mounted, and in a moment of desperation, he grabbed a knife from his desk. He pressed the cold steel against his wrist, feeling a sense of release with each cut. Afterward, he cleaned the blade and put it away, letting the water from the shower wash away his pain and tears. In that moment, the voices quieted, leaving him with a single thought: why? The rest of the weekend passed in solitude as he remained locked in his room, only venturing out for food and drinks. Time felt stagnant, and his mind was a storm of thoughts about the previous day. He took a swig from a bottle of whiskey, wishing for silence. Realizing he had school the next day filled him with dread. He returned to his messy room, taking another drink before retrieving his knife. Noticing the blade was dull and stained, he sighed, knowing he would need to replace it soon. He sat on his bed, taking another swig before pressing the blade to his wrist again. With each cut, the noise in his head faded, and he felt a moment of peace. He took one last drink before drifting off to sleep, hearing a calm voice that seemed to offer comfort and concern. 2 months had passed since the incident at the music store. He had saved enough for a guitar but was too anxious to return, fearing an encounter with the people from that day. The school day flew by without anyone speaking to him, which he considered a blessing. As he packed his bag, he put on his headphones and walked through the front gate, feeling a spark of hope. He decided to visit the music store, standing outside for what felt like an eternity before finally reaching for the door. Just as he was about to enter, the door swung open. Midoriya. It's been a while, Shoni, the shop owner, greeted him warmly, pulling him inside. They chatted at the counter, and Shoni asked where he had been hiding. Izuku feigned a smile, explaining he had been busy with school. Shoni mentioned a talent night happening soon, hoping to inspire others to showcase their skills. Izuku chuckled lightly, feeling a bit more at ease. He expressed interest in purchasing a guitar, admitting that it would help streamline his music process. As their conversation continued, he recalled a particular guitar he had liked during his last visit. Suddenly, he froze upon hearing a familiar voice behind him, feeling a wave of anxiety wash over him. 𝐤𝐬 had been searching for Midoriya for 2 months, visiting the park and music store daily, hoping to see him again. She felt unsettled by his reaction during their last encounter and wanted to explain herself. On this particular Thursday, she decided to skip her usual routine, feeling exhausted and in need of a break. As she walked past the music store, she instinctively glanced inside and was surprised to see him at the counter. Panic set in as she realized she hadn't prepared what to say after all this time. Calmness washed over her as she reassured herself that she could do this. She took a deep breath, gathered her courage, and stepped into the store. Upon entering, she greeted him, but he remained tense, not even turning around. She stood at the door, hoping for a response, pleading silently for him to agree to talk. After a moment, he hesitantly replied, keeping his gaze fixed on the floor. She felt a flicker of hope as he agreed to her request. 𝐼𝐮𝐬, noticing the interaction, encouraged Midoriya, suggesting that she could help him with instruments while he made a quick call. She started toward the guitars, but when she looked back, she realized he wasn't following. She called out to him, and he slowly approached, his wrist held tightly in his grip. Once they reached the guitars, she picked one up and began to play softly, inviting him to sit down to ease the tension. He took a seat on the stool across from her, still avoiding her gaze. She paused her playing to address him, explaining that she wanted to apologize. Her father's protectiveness often led him to act tough, which sometimes made situations awkward. Midoriya kept his eyes downcast, and she sensed his discomfort. She resumed playing, reassuring him that he had done nothing wrong and that he didn't need to apologize. To lighten the mood, she shared a small anecdote about how her mother had scolded her father, hoping to elicit a smile from him. Instead, he continued to apologize, which puzzled her. She stopped playing again, questioning why he felt the need to apologize when he hadn't done anything wrong. As he fidgeted with his wrist, she leaned in, concerned. He assured her he was fine, but she could see the tension in his body. She gently urged him to look at her, and when he finally did, their eyes met for the first time that day. She asked if everything was all right, sensing he was not being truthful. Handing him the guitar, she encouraged him to play, noting that it had been a while since he last did. Reluctantly, he took the guitar, staring at it as if it were foreign to him. She reassured him that it wouldn't bite and encouraged him to show her what he remembered. He began to play, but it was clear he hadn't practiced since their last encounter. She watched him, relieved to see him relax a bit as he played. Gradually, his skills improved, and she complimented him on his progress. However, when she asked about his absence, he suddenly stopped playing and looked down, a hint of distress in his demeanor. She felt a pang of concern as he expressed his uncertainty. She admitted that she had been searching for him every day for the past 2 months, hoping to find him and apologize for their previous encounter. He questioned her intentions, and she explained that she sensed he was hiding something. Realizing she might have overstepped, she quickly apologized for making him uncomfortable. He then asked her a question that caught her off guard, his voice soft and distant. She felt time freeze as she looked into his faded green eyes, struggling to find the right words. He continued, revealing his insecurities and past actions, which only deepened her concern. She firmly told him to stop, standing up and confronting him directly. She expressed her frustration, emphasizing that she didn't care about what was considered normal. She had spent the last 2 months searching for him, wanting to apologize, and that alone proved her feelings. Midoriya lowered his head, realizing the truth in her words, and shook his head, understanding that she didn't see him as a freak. Midoriya released his grip on his shirt and settled back down across from her. She expressed her intention to ask him a question, emphasizing her longing for honesty while assuring him that he could choose not to answer if he felt uncomfortable. He nodded slowly, his gaze still lowered. She inquired about the reason he had run away that day, acknowledging the yelling from her father but sensing there was more to it. Midoriya remained silent, taking deep breaths to steady himself. He wanted to be truthful but felt unable to share everything. Just as he took his final breath, a voice interrupted the moment. He tensed up immediately upon hearing his father's voice. She turned in shock to see him but quickly redirected her attention back to Midoriya, her mind racing with concern about his reaction. She resolved that if he attempted to flee again, she would pursue him. Midoriya sat frozen, gripping his wrist tightly, as his father continued speaking. He offered an apology for his previous behavior, acknowledging it was uncalled for and that he hadn't given Midoriya a chance to explain. He expressed his protective instincts for his daughter and admitted he had made assumptions about Midoriya. He invited Midoriya to an event the following night, suggesting it would be enjoyable and that he would at least know someone there. After placing a hand gently on his daughter's head, he left. She turned to Midoriya, apologizing for her father's unexpected presence. He remained motionless, still processing the situation. She asked if she could pose another question, her voice soft and shaky. He agreed. She wanted to know if he truly meant what he had said earlier. He affirmed his sincerity, wondering why she would think otherwise. Leaning forward slightly, she noticed him beginning to relax a bit. She then asked if his father meant everything he had said. Midoriya confirmed that his father was genuine, though a bit foolish at times. As Midoriya took another deep breath, he sat up, still holding his wrist tightly but managing a faint smile. She noticed that while he seemed to relax, his smile appeared forced. She stood up and reached for the guitar, suggesting they move to a different location since the atmosphere felt heavy. He handed her the guitar and began to rise, asking if she needed to head home. She dismissed the idea, explaining that her father's gesture was his way of saying to enjoy herself and not to stay out too late. He accepted this and agreed to accompany her, feeling relieved that he had some time before needing to return home. As they walked toward the door, Midoriya reflected on how they had ended up back at the park where they first met, sitting on the same bench. They shared a comfortable silence, observing the people passing by. She remarked on the coincidence of their repeated encounters in the same places, while he felt it was more of a coincidence than anything amusing. She then reminded him of the question she had asked earlier before being interrupted by her father. He had hoped she would forget. He shifted to sit on the ground, asking if she truly wanted to know. She affirmed her curiosity. Midoriya admitted his social awkwardness and how he often panicked in confrontational situations, leading him to run away. He wrapped his arms around his knees, hoping his explanation would suffice. She challenged his response, expressing skepticism about his simplicity. Surprised, he questioned her doubt, realizing that he must be easy to read. She explained that her quirk heightened her hearing, making her perceptive to things others might miss. She had sensed something was off with him during their encounters but had struggled to pinpoint it. Feeling anxious, Midoriya lamented that the one person who seemed to understand him could read him so easily. She placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, encouraging him to relax and assuring him she wasn't seeking all his secrets, just honesty between them. He found humor in the idea of being honest with himself, feeling the weight of the moment. There was no way honesty would lead to anything good for him, possibly therapy or worse. He turned his head toward her and asked, not wanting to sound rude, why she even cared. She chuckled softly to herself for a moment, reflecting on her own thoughts. She had been pondering that very question since he had run away. It turned out that her concerns stemmed from a realization. She considered him a friend, despite not knowing each other well. They shared a love for music, and he had allowed her to explore his creative process, which had proven helpful for her as well. She smiled at him, her excitement evident as her jacks perked up slightly. She added that she wouldn't be giving guitar lessons to someone she had just met, reinforcing her view of their friendship. His lips curled into a small smile, perhaps the first genuine one in a long time. He felt as if he could stay in this moment forever, thinking that today was a good day. Just then, his phone began to ring. He glanced at it and saw it was Aunt Mitsuki. He apologized and stepped away to take the call. She assured him it was fine and nodded in understanding. He answered the call, informing Aunt Mitsuki that he was at the park hanging out with a friend. He hadn't known she was coming over that day. He reassured her that everything was fine and promised to be safe. However, he had to decline her request for him to do something tomorrow, as he already had plans. He wrapped up the call, feeling a mix of emotions. After hanging up, silence enveloped them. They sat together, listening to the gentle breeze. She turned to him, breaking the quiet. She asked if that had been his parents wondering where he was. He clarified that it was a family friend and pulled his knees closer to his chest. She inquired if he needed to head back to meet them. He took a deep breath and asked if he could pose a question. She encouraged him to go ahead, her demeanor lightening with a small giggle. He hesitated, feeling the tension in the air, and asked if she had overheard any of his conversation. She admitted that it sounded like they were worried about him. He nodded, confirming his suspicion, and requested that she forget what she had heard. If he received another call while she was around, he asked her to do her best not to listen, understanding it might be difficult. She agreed but wanted to ask him something in return. He encouraged her to proceed. She inquired about his plans for tomorrow, noting that he didn't seem like the type to go out on weekends. He was taken aback, reminding her that she had been present when his dad invited him to the event. He stood up and stretched, adding that it would be rude to decline after the apology. She looked up at him, noticing the purple and black 𝗟𝐵𝐵 band on his wrist, and commented on it. He acknowledged that he still had it, feeling a mix of nostalgia and embarrassment. He hoped she hadn't noticed it too closely. Curious, she asked about the 𝗟𝐵𝐵 band, her gaze penetrating. He brushed it off, assuring her it was nothing to worry about, but she wasn't convinced. She insisted he was lying. Frustrated, he balled his fists and turned away from her, insisting it was nothing and that he was fine. She expressed her concern, stating it didn't sound like he was fine. She stood up behind him and placed a hand on his shoulder. In a moment of anger, he raised his voice, demanding she drop the subject. She quickly withdrew her hand, calling his name softly. He apologized, asking her to let it go, and started to walk home before she could say anything more. As Friday morning approached, he woke up and dragged himself out of bed, facing a shattered reflection in the mirror. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a half-empty bottle of whiskey, taking a swig to feel the familiar burn in his throat, a reminder that he was still alive. He then took a shower, dreading the moment when his scars would be on full display, even if no one else was around. Halfway through, he took another swig, and by the time he finished, his phone rang. Aunt Mitsuki called every morning to ensure he was up for school. After the call, he took one last swig before getting dressed, hoping the day would pass quickly. The school day unfolded as usual. He kept his head down, headphones on, only looking up to jot down notes. No one seemed to care whether he paid attention. The only time he caught anyone's attention was when something was thrown at him. Lunch was the same as always, spent on the roof with his legs dangling over the edge. It was peaceful, aside from the occasional student who would mockingly shout, "Jump." He would chuckle to himself, thinking that if he did, they would simply step over the mark he left behind as if it were nothing. As the day continued, with just a couple of hours left, the final PRDs were easy, giving everyone time to tease him. Even the teacher joined in, as if it were part of the lesson. He didn't care what they thought, they knew nothing about him, and the one thing they did know was a lie. Even if that lie was one he created, it didn't change the fact that they were unaware of his true self. Finally, the school day came to an end, and it was time to head home and prepare for the evening. He thought to himself that at least the worst part of the day was over. As he stood up, a hand slammed onto his desk, causing sparks to fly. He felt a jolt of surprise and turned to see his classmate, who had a reputation for being aggressive. He greeted him nervously, managing a small smile, and asked if he needed anything. The classmate confronted him, demanding to know what he was doing, suggesting he had heard about his plans for the night. "What kind of plans would you come up with?" The grip tightened around him, causing him to tremble. It was just an event at a music store, something he wanted to check out. He was thrown back into his chair, the question lingering in the air. The bully demanded to know where this store was, and his friends laughed behind him. It wasn't far from his house, but before he could finish, the bully interrupted, letting off small explosions onto his desk, leaving a slight char. He claimed to know where the store was and told him to leave, tired of looking at his quirkless face. As they walked away, they kicked him and the chair over, laughing. He wished for the night to come faster. Finally, it was time to head out. He felt hopeful, thinking it would be a good night. The event didn't specify what to wear, so he opted for casual attire, jeans and a blue hoodie. After ensuring he had everything he needed, he took a swig of whiskey to calm his nerves. He was just a couple of blocks away from the store when he heard a familiar voice. The bully approached him, mocking him for actually going out. He was dragged into an alley, despite his protests about being late for his plans. The bully insisted it would only take a moment, throwing him against the wall. He tried to explain he was meeting a friend, but the bully's fist slammed into his gut, leaving him breathless. The bully taunted him, claiming no one would want to be friends with a quirkless loser. Anger surged within him, not only at the bully's words but also at himself for knowing there was some truth to them. He refused to take it any longer. He stood up, glaring at the bully, and in that heated moment his quirk activated, turning his eyes completely black. He threw a punch at the bully's stomach, demanding silence. The punch only fueled the bully's rage. He was sent back into the wall, feeling a burning sensation on his chest and tasting blood in his mouth. As darkness began to creep in, the bully unleashed another blast, intensifying the pain. The bully's words cut deep, suggesting he should take a dive off the roof before he left, leaving him alone in the alley. Time passed, and he sat there, everything blurring and fading to black. Thoughts raced through his mind about whether anyone would notice his absence or if they would simply go home. Just as everything started to fade, he heard a man's voice calling out to him. Meanwhile, 𝐤𝐬 was thrilled that it was Friday evening. The weekend had begun, and there was no better way to kick it off than with a concert. Although it was more of a showcase, it was still an opportunity to enjoy music and see her new friend again. She left her house before her parents, eager to secure a good spot, wondering if he would actually show up. As she approached the store, she noticed people gathering outside, indicating they had closed early to set up. She passed an alleyway and heard strange noises coming from it. The sounds were unsettling, reminding her of a traumatic childhood memory. She had soundproofed her house for a reason. When she heard the man's voice calling out to a kid, concern washed over her. She didn't want to see what was happening but felt compelled to intervene. Looking around and seeing no one nearby, she took a deep breath and stepped into the alley. As she got closer, she prepared her jacks, ready for anything. The situation looked dire. The kid wasn't waking up. She spotted a figure crouched over him and warned them to stop, claiming she had called the police and heroes were on the way. The figure stood up, confusion evident on his face. He questioned why he would leave, stating he needed to report the condition of the kid. 𝐤𝐬 was taken aback, realizing he wasn't the one responsible for the situation. Tall and slender, with wild hair, dressed in a black jumpsuit and an extremely long scarf, the figure stood out. The realization hit that this person was a hero. The hero acknowledged the observation and then expressed concern about needing to call for help, admitting to a previous oversight. As the hero nervously clicked their jacks together, they pulled out a phone to make the call. They requested that someone keep an eye on the injured individual until they returned, wanting to avoid causing a scene in the street. As the hero stepped away, a wave of dread washed over as the identity of the injured boy became clear. It was Midoriya. Rushing to his side, concern filled the air as the hero knelt beside him, questioning what had happened. The response revealed that the hero had arrived just moments before and noted the boy's condition. They suggested that if the observer knew Midoriya, it would be wise to accompany him to the hospital. The observer felt a surge of emotion, questioning why it had to be Midoriya and expressing disbelief at the sight of his injuries. The boy's chest bore signs of severe burns, but the faint sound of his breathing offered a glimmer of hope. The hero urged the observer to share their connection to Midoriya as they prepared to leave. The observer admitted to only knowing Midoriya from a few encounters, primarily his name and his love for music. The hero sighed, acknowledging that any information was better than none. As sirens echoed in the distance, the hero lifted Midoriya and carried him out of the alley, urging the observer to hurry and join them in the ambulance. In the hospital, Midoriya awoke to a dull ache throughout his body, struggling to recall what had happened. The bright room made it difficult to see clearly, but a voice soon broke through the haze. A man introduced himself as 𝐼𝐻𝐻, explaining that he had found Midoriya unconscious in an alley and brought him to the hospital. Midoriya took in his surroundings, questioning why 𝐼𝐻𝐻 had gone to such lengths. The response revealed the severity of his condition, with third-degree burns and broken ribs. The realization of how close he had come to a tragic fate struck him deeply. As he placed a hand on his chest, pain shot through him, prompting him to ask how long he had been there. 𝐼𝐻𝐻 informed him it had been about 3 hours and that he would likely be discharged the next day, pending the doctor's assessment. Grateful yet anxious, Midoriya felt a chill run up his arm, prompting a sense of dread. 𝐼𝐻𝐻, noticing his reaction, inquired about the scars on Midoriya's body. The boy hesitated, explaining that his childhood had been anything but normal, marked by bullying due to being quirkless. 𝐼𝐻𝐻 listened intently, prompting Midoriya to reflect on the emotional toll of his experiences. The conversation shifted to his parents, and Midoriya chuckled at the thought of them arriving. He admitted he had no idea where they were, leading Eraserhead to stand and excuse himself to make a call. Left alone, Midoriya sighed, feeling the weight of the day's events. He realized he was supposed to meet friends at a music store, and anxiety washed over him at the thought of disappointing them. Just then, Eraserhead returned, stating that they needed to talk and that the doctor would be in shortly. The atmosphere grew tense as they waited in silence until the doctor entered, expressing relief at seeing Midoriya awake. He explained that while Midoriya had been in rough shape, he would recover in a few weeks. The doctor mentioned that they had contacted an emergency contact, which made Midoriya tense up. When asked what had happened, Midoriya recounted the incident of being mugged on his way to meet a friend. The doctor probed further, curious about why he might have been targeted. Midoriya chuckled, feeling the absurdity of the situation, and Eraserhead chimed in, suggesting that the attacker might not have known about Midoriya's quirk, which could have made him seem more formidable than he appeared. Midoriya doubted that, asserting that the assailant had clearly known they could take what they wanted from him. They knew he lacked a quirk and chose him for that reason. The doctor glanced at Eraserhead, puzzled. He mentioned that, according to the chart, Midoriya did possess a quirk. Midoriya lowered his head, feeling the doctor's gaze on him again. The doctor assured him that everything would be fine and that once they received the last test results, he would be able to go home. With that, the doctor exited the room, leaving them in silence. Eraserhead leaned forward in his chair, questioning how much of what he had been told was true. Midoriya admitted that he had a quirk but wished he had never been born with it. When asked what his quirk was, he revealed it was called Traumatize. Whenever he used it, he saw orbs around people, and when he touched them, he made them relive a traumatic experience. He took a deep breath, feeling a tremor run through him, explaining that he also experienced the memory and could amplify the trauma within it. Eraserhead sat in stunned silence for a moment, then inquired how Midoriya knew he could do all that. Midoriya explained that he had to use it on himself to gain control, ensuring he wouldn't lose control and harm someone else. When Eraserhead pressed for more details, Midoriya revealed that his quirk had driven his mother to madness. She had lived with him for 6 years after his quirk manifested before being sent to a mental rehabilitation center at the beginning of last year. He hadn't seen her since. Eraserhead then asked about Midoriya's father. Midoriya confessed he had never met him and learned that his mother had kicked him out for cheating. Midoriya kept his head down, sensing Eraserhead standing up and walking toward him. Suddenly, he felt a hand on his head, offering reassurance that everything would be all right. Eraserhead mentioned he had something to take care of but would return the next day before Midoriya was discharged. Midoriya nodded without looking up. Eraserhead placed a note on Midoriya's lap, explaining that his friend had been worried about him and that she had to be practically dragged out of the hospital. He encouraged Midoriya to get some rest. Once alone, Midoriya looked at the note, his heart racing as he opened it. The message expressed regret for not being able to stay until he woke up and reassured him that he would be fine. It ended with a request for him to call when he got up, as 𝐾𝐿 would be anxiously waiting. The note also contained a phone number. Sighing, Midoriya searched for his phone in his bag, where he found his clothes from earlier. Taking a deep breath, he began to dial the number. Fridays were always the best for Mitsuki. It marked the end of the work week, and she looked forward to spending the weekend with her family. Despite their chaos, they maintained a tradition of family meals on Fridays. As she prepared dinner in the kitchen, she noticed the clock nearing 5. Just then, she heard the door open. Katsuki entered, announcing his arrival. Mitsuki greeted him, teasing him about his timing and asking when the food would be ready. He shrugged off her question, heading towards the stairs. Mitsuki turned back to her cooking and wondered what Izuku was doing that evening. Katsuki halted, expressing indifference about Izuku's plans. Mitsuki reminded him that Izuku was his friend. Katsuki dismissed her, stating that Izuku was going to some music night. Mitsuki smirked, suggesting that it sounded like Izuku would have fun on a date. Katsuki vehemently denied that Izuku could have a date, pointing out his social struggles. Mitsuki recalled a conversation with Izuku, where he mentioned being with a friend, and speculated it might be a girl. Katsuki scoffed at the idea, insisting he could never be jealous of someone like Izuku. As dinner neared completion, Mitsuki glanced at Masaru, who was watching the news in the living room. Just then her phone rang, interrupting the peaceful moment. Answering the call, she learned from a receptionist at 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐻𝐬 General Hospital that Izuku was listed as her emergency contact. Her heart sank as she learned he had been brought in unconscious after an incident but was stable and would be released the next day. Relieved yet anxious, Mitsuki asked if she could visit. The receptionist confirmed, suggesting she bring a change of clothes since Izuku's were not suitable for wearing. Hanging up, Mitsuki dropped her phone, nearly collapsing as Masaru approached her. He noticed her distress and asked if everything was all right. Mitsuki informed him that Izuku was in the hospital and that she needed to check on him. Masaru insisted they would all go, offering to get Katsuki. Mitsuki quickly declined, stating they should stay behind. As she made her way to the door, Masaru questioned her reasoning. She explained her concerns, and he took her hand, squeezing it in support. Mitsuki expressed her belief that Izuku might still be struggling, despite her inability to find proof. Driving toward Izuku's house, Mitsuki fought to suppress her panic about what she might find. Memories flooded back to a previous call from the school about Izuku fainting, and she couldn't shake the feeling of dread. He could still picture him as if he were right in front of him. The boy appeared peaceful, yet his arms bore scars that told a different story. It was hard to believe that the nurse at the school treated it as if it were nothing. After discovering that the school was indifferent to his self-harm, he seriously considered suggesting a school transfer. However, he knew that would likely be worse for him. At least in his current school, Katsuki could keep an eye on him. The drive to his house was a short 15 minutes, but it felt like hours. Just as he parked and was about to exit the car, his phone rang again. He answered, concerned. He heard a familiar voice on the other end. He asked if Izuku was all right, to which Izuku replied that he was just sore. His friend insisted on coming over, knowing he would need a change of clothes. Izuku requested his black hoodie and charger, and his friend assured him he would be there as soon as possible. After expressing gratitude, he took a deep breath and rested his head on the steering wheel, thanking God for Izuku's safety. Tears streamed down his face as he sat in the car for a few more moments. Izuku leaned back, releasing a long sigh. He felt relieved that things had gone better than expected. He glanced at the note in his hand and unlocked his phone again, taking a deep breath before dialing. A woman answered, her voice calm yet unfamiliar. When she didn't recognize his name, he apologized, thinking he had the wrong number. She clarified that she didn't know him but had been asked to watch the phone. After a brief moment, she called for her daughter, 𝐾𝐿, to come to the phone. Izuku was taken aback by the unexpected label of boyfriend and quickly clarified that they barely knew each other. The woman chuckled, explaining that she enjoyed teasing her daughter and that her husband often reacted dramatically to such things. When asked if everything was all right, Izuku hesitated, recalling a lesson learned the hard way. The woman's tone shifted to one of concern, and before he could respond, he heard muffled voices and a scuffle in the background. Her husband, Mr. 𝐒𝐿𝐬, apologized for the confusion, explaining that they hadn't fully informed his wife about the events of the night. Izuku reassured him that he was just confused. Mr. 𝐒𝐿𝐬 introduced himself and mentioned that they had finally convinced 𝐾𝐿𝐬 to take a shower. Izuku explained that he was sore and had some burns but would be fine and released the next day. Mr. 𝐒𝐿𝐬 invited him over for dinner, but Izuku declined for Saturday, knowing he would be busy with family. However, he agreed to come over on Sunday, and Mr. 𝐒𝐿𝐬 promised to pick him up at the music store. As they spoke, Izuku felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation. He could hear 𝐾𝐿𝐬 coming down the stairs, and he struggled to find his words. Mr. 𝐒𝐿𝐬 encouraged him to relax, but Izuku's heart raced as he waited for 𝐾𝐿𝐬 to pick up the phone. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft and shaky, revealing her worry. He reassured her that he was all right, and they exchanged apologies for the situation. Izuku mentioned he would be out by the next day, and she expressed relief that it wasn't too serious. As the conversation continued, Izuku asked her what she had seen while he was there. Her response was hesitant, and he could sense her discomfort. She mentioned the burns on his chest, and he sighed, acknowledging the severity of his injuries. 𝐾𝐿𝐬 pressed further, asking if he had any other injuries, and he reluctantly admitted that she had seen his arms as well. They shared a moment of silence, and Izuku assured her that he was okay, despite the scars. 𝐾𝐿 pleaded with him to promise he would be all right, and he did so, trying to comfort her. They fell into a quiet lull, unsure of what to say next. Finally, she asked about his release time, and he mentioned it would likely be in the morning. Before he could respond to her request to call her when he got home, his Aunt Mitsuki burst into the room, nearly shouting his name. She was surprised to see him on the phone and asked who he was speaking with. Izuku quickly explained that he was talking to a friend to apologize for missing an event. Mitsuki, unaware of the deeper context, assumed he was speaking with a girlfriend, adding to the confusion of the moment. She gave him a minute before leaving the room with a smile. He sighed and returned to the phone, apologizing for the interruption. He asked how much she had heard, to which she replied that it was enough, playfully stating that she was now his girlfriend. He felt flustered, explaining that she often jumped to conclusions and that he hadn't even mentioned her gender, only referring to her as a friend. She teased him about being known as just a friend, and he insisted it wasn't like that. She smiled, claiming it was just her intuition, and then inquired about how he was feeling. He reassured her that he was fine, though he would be sore for a few days. She noticed the scars on his arms and asked what had happened. He spent the next half-hour recounting the events, carefully omitting the fact that it was 𝐾𝐿 who had caused his injuries. After finishing his story, they sat in silence until a nurse entered the room. The nurse apologized for the interruption, stating that she needed to clean and change the dressing on his burns. He flinched as Mitsuki's eyes darted toward him, questioning what the nurse meant. He awkwardly admitted that he hadn't mentioned the burns, prompting her to point out that he had left that detail out. He moved to the edge of the bed as the nurse helped him out of his hospital gown, revealing layers of gauze wrapped around his chest. The nurse began to unwrap it, cautioning him that it might sting since the skin was still sensitive. He nodded, preparing himself for the sight. He joked that this would be the first time he saw the damage, earning a playful smack from Mitsuki, who insisted it didn't make him feel better. As the last layers were removed, he looked down and saw the burn mark on his chest, shaped like an 8-pronged star. It was significant and took up most of his chest. The nurse wrapped him back up, explaining that it would scar but would become smaller over time. He accepted this news with a nod, noting that it was just another scar to add to his collection. He asked if it would look similar to how it did now, and the nurse confirmed it before leaving the room. He sighed, trying to lighten the mood by saying at least it looked cool, which caused Mitsuki to tighten her grip around him as she cried softly into his hair. The next morning, he woke up feeling disoriented, realizing he was still in the hospital. After checking the time, he hoped to be released soon. He stood up to get dressed, wincing as pain shot through his chest with each movement. Changing into his shirt and hoodie proved to be the most challenging part of the day. Once dressed, he sat on the edge of the bed, reflecting on everything that had happened. He felt a mix of emotions about 𝐾𝐿, the hero who saved him, and 𝐼𝐻𝐼𝐻, who had glimpsed his past. He flopped back onto the bed, lost in thought, recalling how he hadn't seen Mitsuki cry like that since his mother left. Taking a deep breath, he closed his eyes, and as he exhaled, he reached out to touch a red orb that had appeared. Suddenly, he found himself standing in the doorway of his apartment, where all the lights were off. The door behind him opened, but he didn't turn around, knowing what was coming next. A younger version of himself entered, calling for his mother. He followed the younger self through the house, checking every room before returning to the living room. The younger version assumed she had been called in early. As he watched, the younger self opened a letter and began to read, the light fading from his eyes as he fell to his knees. Auntie Mitsuki entered just then, and upon seeing him, knelt down and wrapped her arms around him, crying and apologizing. Startled, he sat up in bed, gasping for air as a single tear rolled down his cheek. He noted how it was always just a single tear. As he caught his breath, he heard a knock on the door. When it opened, the doctor walked in. How was Midoriya feeling that morning? He was still sore, and changing was a challenge. The doctor had anticipated this but reassured him that he would be fine by Monday. Pulling up a chair, the doctor sat in front of him and asked whether he wanted the good or bad news first. Midoriya wondered if it really mattered. With a sigh, the doctor explained that the results had come back clear of infections, so he was free to go home. However, the hero who brought him in had requested that they wait for his arrival before discharging him. Midoriya looked down, feeling a bit anxious. He asked if there was anything else he needed to know. The doctor mentioned the discharge paperwork and home care instructions, handing him some documents. These outlined what he could and couldn't do, but due to his age, he wouldn't be able to manage most of the list. The doctor advised him to avoid any strenuous activities for the following week and noted that he would be excused from gym class. He also recommended staying home on Monday if the pain persisted. The doctor explained that he would provide some gauze to take home, but he should not change the wrapping until the next day. Midoriya acknowledged the instructions and the doctor asked if he had any questions before leaving. He didn't, and the doctor informed him that 𝐼𝐻 would be there shortly, encouraging him to rest. Once the doctor left, Midoriya gathered his belongings and waited on the bed for 𝐼𝐻's arrival. After 30 minutes, there was a knock on the door. He called for the visitor to come in while grabbing his bag. The door opened to reveal a man dressed in dark blue jeans and a long-sleeved black shirt, his long jet black hair pulled back. He asked how Midoriya was feeling that day. Midoriya replied that he was sore and asked if they were ready to leave. 𝐼𝐻 confirmed that they were and inquired if he had all his belongings. Midoriya assured him he did and started walking toward the door. As they exited, 𝐼𝐻 reminded him to call him Mr. Aizawa when he was in civilian clothes, expressing his preference not to be recognized. They walked through the hallway in silence, and once they reached the parking lot, Midoriya broke the quiet by asking why Aizawa had insisted on waiting for him before being discharged. He tightened his grip on his bag straps as Aizawa explained that he wanted to ensure Midoriya got home safely and had some questions to ask. They approached a small black car, and Aizawa unlocked it. Midoriya took a seat in the front and placed his bag at his feet. Aizawa asked where he lived, and Midoriya mentioned an apartment complex in Mustafa. The first few minutes of the drive were quiet, and it felt surreal for Midoriya to be driven home by the man who had taken him to the hospital. They continued in silence until they reached a traffic light. Aizawa asked what the doctors had said about his recovery time. Midoriya explained that he couldn't engage in any active activities for the next week and that he was advised not to attend school on Monday. Aizawa confirmed that he had received a doctor's note to excuse him. After a moment of silence, Aizawa inquired whether Midoriya still faced bullying at school. Midoriya let out a small laugh, explaining that he was often ignored or treated like a stress ball by his peers. Aizawa looked at him, puzzled, before returning his gaze to the road. Midoriya elaborated that he felt invisible in class, often overlooked by teachers who had given up on him. He recounted an incident from middle school when he had passed out during gym class, only to discover that the teacher hadn't noticed until 20 minutes later. Aizawa's grip on the steering wheel tightened as Midoriya shared how he had spent the rest of that day in the nurse's office, missing classes, and how the teacher hadn't even informed him of what he had missed upon his return. Aizawa expressed disbelief at the situation, insisting that it mattered. Midoriya acknowledged that it was nothing new for him. He often tuned out in class, focusing on music and taking notes. He had taught himself everything since middle school and maintained top grades, leaving Aizawa momentarily speechless. After a few more minutes of silence, Aizawa asked why Midoriya didn't tell anyone about his quirk, suggesting that it might change how he was treated. Midoriya laughed again, explaining that he would rather remain quirkless than be seen as someone who could invoke traumatic memories in others. He felt that being quirkless might allow him to connect with people who understood his situation. Aizawa pointed out that Midoriya at least had one friend, recalling how a girl had held his hand during the ride to the hospital. Midoriya dismissed this, stating that she didn't know anything about him and that they had only met a few times. Aizawa sighed, suggesting that Midoriya should consider sharing more about himself. Midoriya promised to think about it as they continued their drive in silence. After 30 minutes, they arrived at the rundown apartment complex where Midoriya lived. Aizawa parked the car and asked to see his doctor's notes, believing it would be best to take them to his school. Midoriya retrieved the folder containing the notes and handed it over. Aizawa thanked him and placed the notes in his wallet, then inquired about the school he attended. Midoriya mentioned 𝐼𝐻 Junior High as he zipped up his bag and reached for the door. 𝐼𝐬 placed a hand on his shoulder, asking one last question about his career aspirations. Midoriya sighed and looked down at the floor of the car, contemplating his future. He expressed his passion for music, contemplating a future in it while still holding on to the dream of becoming a hero, determined to prove the doubters wrong. With a light laugh, he removed his hand from the shoulder of his companion, sharing encouragement and a promise to see them again. After exiting the car, he retrieved his phone and climbed the stairs to his apartment. He dialed his Aunt Mitsuki's number, and she answered with concern, asking if everything was all right. He reassured her that he had just returned home, explaining that the hero who had taken him to the hospital ensured he got back safely. She expressed relief at his safe return and invited him over for dinner, but he declined, stating he needed to rest due to lingering soreness. When she suggested meeting up the next day, he sighed, revealing a prior commitment to 𝐤𝐬 for dinner. Mitsuki teased him about his relationship with 𝐤𝐬, to which he insisted they were just friends, unaware of his feelings. The conversation shifted to his scars and the 𝗟𝗶𝗸 band he had shown her, prompting Mitsuki to encourage him to be open with 𝐤𝐬. He felt torn between wanting to share his truth and fearing it might scare her away. Mitsuki urged him to call 𝐤𝐬, reminding him of their earlier conversation. He reluctantly acknowledged that she would have insisted on hearing from him first. After hanging up, he felt a mix of pride and anxiety about his situation. He made his way to the kitchen, retrieving a hidden bottle of whiskey to calm his nerves before returning to his room. He dialed 𝐤𝐬's number, only to find her father on the line. He relayed 𝐤𝐬's request for him to call upon his release from the hospital. Her father playfully refused to inform her, insisting it was his responsibility. After quickly jotting down the new number, he thanked him and hung up, feeling bewildered by the unexpected turn of events in his life. Meanwhile, 𝐤𝐬 woke up early on Saturday morning, puzzled by her early rise. She attempted to drift back to sleep, but a nagging thought about Midoriya's well-being pulled her from her bed. Realizing she had forgotten to check in on him, she got up and noticed her guitar, feeling a lack of inspiration. After changing into comfortable clothes, she headed downstairs to find her mother in the kitchen. Her mother greeted her, noting her early start, and 𝐤𝐬 explained that she couldn't sleep any longer. Her mother, with a hint of amusement, pointed out that 𝐤𝐬 wasn't the only one who could hear everything, teasing her about her obvious feelings. 𝐤𝐬 sighed, acknowledging the truth in her mother's words, and they shared a light moment as she contemplated her day ahead. The moment she decided to stay downstairs instead of heading back to her room, she turned to face her mother and smiled. Her mother, with a knowing look, remarked that she just had a feeling. It seemed nothing escaped her mother's attention. As she returned to her task, her mother guessed that she was waiting for a call from someone special. Feeling her cheeks heat up, she was taken aback by the observation. Her mother chuckled lightly, pointing out that her daughter was in the same spot as the previous night. She hesitated before responding, admitting that it was true. Her mother pressed further, asking what this boy meant to her, noting that it was unusual for her to act this way. Looking down, she confessed that she honestly didn't know. Fidgeting with her jacks, she pondered the boy's significance while glancing back at her mother, who was smiling knowingly. Curious about the look, she inquired about it. Her mother reassured her, acknowledging her worries but encouraging her not to stress. She mentioned having preparations for a family night and suggested her daughter enjoy her day off. She promised to let her know when the boy called. Grateful, she thanked her mother and headed towards the stairs, glancing back to ask about the preparations. Her mother reminded her of their family night, and she sheepishly admitted that she had forgotten amidst everything happening lately. As she climbed the stairs, she wondered if he could come over for the family night. Once in her room, she picked up her guitar, letting her thoughts drift back to the whirlwind of emotions from the past few days. She recalled running into him after he had left the music store, sharing a heartfelt conversation that seemed to change everything. He was supposed to join them for talent night, and the thought of spending time together made her heart race. Yet she felt a weight in her chest, reflecting on how things could have been different. If he had just said no, he wouldn't have ended up in the hospital, wouldn't have those scars. Setting her guitar down, she moved to her desk, picking up a pen and staring at the blank page. She realized she had missed the signs of his pain, the faded look in his eyes, the forced smile, the stuttering. Seeing the cup filled with 𝗟𝐵𝐵 bands reminded her that she had given him one, and she felt a pang of guilt for any pain she might have caused. Overwhelmed, she buried her face in her hands, tears slipping down. But she quickly reassured herself that she would do it all over again if it meant helping him, even if it didn't seem like much. Determined, she resolved to be there for him, knowing she couldn't force her way into his life but would wait for her chance to help. She lay back on her bed, drifting off to sleep, wondering what he truly meant to her. When she awoke, she found herself on a couch in an unfamiliar place, confused about how she got there. Just then, she heard a voice calling her name. Sitting up, she saw him standing in the doorway. Surprised, she asked what he was doing there, and he laughed, reminding her that it had been a while since she called him by his last name. He sat beside her, taking her hand and asking if everything was all right, expressing his love for her amidst the stress she was under. Stunned, she processed his words, unsure of how to respond. His affection was overwhelming, and as he leaned in closer, their lips almost touching, a sudden ringing jolted her awake. Sitting up in her bed, she took deep breaths, trying to shake off the remnants of the strange dream. Her phone rang again, and she chuckled to herself, realizing it answered one of her questions. Sitting at her desk, she answered the call. "Hello," she greeted. "Hey, it's me," came the familiar voice. Her heart raced at the sound of his voice, and she wondered why the universe was playing with her emotions. He explained that he had gotten her number from her dad, who had answered his earlier call. She was surprised but relieved that it had worked out. As they chatted, she asked how he was feeling, relieved to hear he was doing better. She twirled one of her jacks in her hand, trying to keep the conversation light, even as her concern for him lingered. 𝐾𝐿 sensed something was off about him. He assured her that he was fine, but she couldn't shake the feeling. After all, he had just been released from the hospital. She returned her attention to her notebook and proposed an idea. She invited him over for dinner the next day, mentioning that her family had a monthly family night. She thought it would be nice for everyone to enjoy a fun evening together. He hesitated, apologizing and explaining that he had other plans. Disappointment washed over her, but he suggested that perhaps they could meet another time. He mentioned someone else had already asked him about tomorrow. Despite the setback, she felt a spark of excitement at the thought of spending time with him. He then hesitated again, almost as if he wanted to say something important. She encouraged him to share his thoughts, and he finally suggested they meet at the music store after school the following Friday. He needed help picking out a guitar, and she felt her heart race at the invitation. When he called her name again, she was startled. He apologized for startling her, and she reassured him that it was fine. She was just caught off guard by his suggestion. Her heart fluttered as she agreed to meet him, and he mentioned he needed to rest, signaling that their conversation was coming to an end. After they said their goodbyes, she sat at her desk, motionless, contemplating whether he had just asked her out. It felt surreal, and she smacked her face with both hands to regain her composure before heading downstairs, grateful for the unexpected turn of events. In the kitchen, her mother was busy. 𝐾𝐿 greeted her and asked about her dad's whereabouts. Her mother pointed toward the studio, curious about her inquiry. 𝐾𝐿 smiled, ready to tease her dad as she approached the studio door. Upon entering, she playfully confronted him about giving out her number without permission, and he winced at her playful reprimand. Laughter echoed from the kitchen as she continued to tease him. The next morning, Izuku woke up to a sharp pain in his chest. He placed a hand over it, memories flooding back. He fell back against his pillow, wondering if this discomfort would be a daily occurrence until he healed. Sitting up, he grabbed his phone and scrolled through the news and music before heading to the bathroom. In the mirror, he saw his familiar reflection, but with noticeable changes. His chest was wrapped in bandages, and remnants of dried blood were in his hair. Yet what struck him most was the slight smile on his face, leaving him bewildered. He pondered when he had last woken up with a smile. The shower felt like a sanctuary as steam enveloped him, allowing his thoughts to wander to his future. The world seemed larger, and he realized that even small moments of brightness could shine through darkness. He let the water cascade over him, contemplating his desires. Eventually, he turned off the water, and the sudden chill jolted him back to reality. After spending over an hour in the shower, he felt he deserved the time. He settled at his desk to work on music, something he hadn't done in days. Just then, his phone buzzed with a message from Auntie Mitsuki, checking in on him and reminding him of his plans for the evening. He appreciated her support and set an alarm to ensure he wouldn't lose track of time. Time flew by as he immersed himself in his work. When his alarm went off, he stood up, saved his progress, and prepared to rewrap his chest. The task took longer than expected, but he eventually stood ready to leave. To calm his nerves, he took a quick swig of whiskey before grabbing his backpack and heading out to the music store. Sunday mornings always seemed to arrive too quickly for 𝐤𝐬. It was the last chance to catch up on sleep, yet the day was often filled with small tasks that piled up. As sunlight streamed through his window, he groaned and flopped back onto his bed, reluctant to rise. After a few minutes, he finally sat up and began tidying his room, though his lack of motivation made the task feel longer than usual. As he descended the stairs, he could hear the sounds of his family bustling about, preparing for the day ahead. As 𝐾𝐿 approached the final steps, she noticed her parents busy with cleaning and cooking. She wondered what was happening. Her mother spotted her and mentioned that they were preparing for Family Day, which meant everyone needed to pitch in. 𝐾𝐿 chuckled as her father began giving her tasks, but her mind lingered on her mother's words, sensing that something was being kept from her. After what felt like an eternity, the cleaning was finally complete. 𝐾𝐿 settled on the couch, staring at the ceiling and pondering the evening's plans. She turned to her mother, curious about the cleaning frenzy, noting that it didn't seem like they were hosting a party. Her mother responded that a clean house felt better, urging 𝐾𝐿 to freshen up for the night. 𝐾𝐿 headed to her room to shower and unwind before family night commenced. A few hours later, she made her way downstairs to find her father by the front door. He explained that he needed to pick something up before the evening began, playfully singing a tune. 𝐾𝐿 playfully pushed him out the door, knowing the song would linger in her mind. Her mother smiled and asked about 𝐾𝐿's outfit for the evening, to which 𝐾𝐿 responded with a little spin, wondering if there was anything wrong with it. Her mother assured her there was nothing amiss and called her to help in the kitchen. Almost an hour later, 𝐾𝐿 heard the door unlocking and stepped out of the kitchen, ready to tease her father about his tardiness. When he entered, he apologized and revealed that his errand was a surprise for her, beckoning someone to come in. 𝐾𝐿 was taken aback to see Midoriya enter, his head down, softly saying, "Surprise." Confused, 𝐾𝐿 approached him, recalling that he had mentioned he couldn't come due to prior plans. Midoriya looked up briefly before quickly averting his gaze, apologizing again. 𝐾𝐿 noticed a hint of blush on his cheeks and felt a rush of warmth. Flustered, she laughed nervously and realized she had forgotten about her outfit, which prompted her to dash upstairs and change into jeans and a hoodie. Returning downstairs, she found her parents chatting with Midoriya. She apologized for her earlier fluster, explaining that she hadn't realized there was a dress code. Midoriya reassured her that it was fine, though he seemed shy. 𝐾𝐿 shot a glare at her parents, who were clearly amused by the situation. Her mother suggested they eat before the food got cold, and they all gathered for the meal. Afterward, they returned to the living room, where 𝐾𝐿 complimented her mother on the dinner, sinking into the couch in contentment. Her father praised the meal and turned to Midoriya, asking if he enjoyed it. Midoriya nodded, admitting it had been a while since he had such good food. Curious, 𝐾𝐿's mother inquired about how Midoriya and 𝐾𝐿 met, noting that 𝐾𝐿 had never been the outgoing type. Midoriya explained that it was a chance encounter at the park, where 𝐾𝐿 had been sitting in his favorite spot. Eventually, she invited him to join her, and their friendship grew from there. He shifted his gaze between 𝐾𝐿 and the floor, feeling a bit shy. 𝐾𝐿's mother pressed for details, asking how long they had known each other. Midoriya replied that they had met at the beginning of the school year, which meant they had known each other for about 3 months. 𝐾𝐿's mother raised an eyebrow, smirking as she noted that 𝐾𝐿 hadn't mentioned him before. 𝐾𝐿 felt her cheeks heat up, defending herself by saying she didn't think it was necessary for her parents to know everything about her life. Her mother, intrigued, asked what 𝐾𝐿 meant, and 𝐾𝐿 glanced at Midoriya, sensing his nervousness. The second time they met was at the music store, where she was teaching him how to play guitar when her dad unexpectedly walked in. She shot a glare at her dad, who flinched slightly. He could be quite overwhelming at times. After that encounter, she didn't see him again until last week, when her dad invited him to the music night on Friday. Her mom shot her a glance before directing a glare at her dad. She had thought the music store incident involved just a random kid, and now she realized that he was the reason she was just hearing about her daughter's friend. Mika's dad pleaded for forgiveness, insisting he hadn't meant any harm. She couldn't help but chuckle as she watched her parents bicker. In the midst of their playful argument, she glanced over at Midoriya, who was nervously staring at the coffee table. She hoped he was enjoying his time there. As she observed him, the sounds of her parents faded, and she reflected on how this guy she barely knew was in her house, a complete mystery to everyone. She wondered if they were just as much a mystery to him. Suddenly, Midoriya called out to her, pulling her from her thoughts. He asked if everything was all right, keeping his gaze down. She apologized for being lost in her thoughts and reassured him that he didn't have to feel forced to do anything if he was uncomfortable. He sighed and finally met her eyes for the first time that evening, expressing his gratitude but insisting that he needed to do this. She watched him as he continued searching on his laptop, curious about what he meant by needing to do this. Her parents returned, and her dad placed a speaker on the table beside Midoriya, handing him the cable and encouraging him to start whenever he was ready. Midoriya plugged in the cord and took a deep breath, staring at the screen. She could sense his heart racing, even though he appeared calm. She gently nudged his shoulder, checking in on him. He admitted that he was nervous about sharing his work, and her mom couldn't help but giggle, teasing him about the tough crowd he had chosen to perform for. Midoriya tensed up at her comment, and she shot her mom a glare, feeling the pressure building in the room. Her dad lightened the mood with a laugh, reminding everyone not to scare him off. But her stomach dropped at the thought of him disappearing again. She felt a wave of panic wash over her, questioning whether she would ever see him again. After a moment of internal pep talk, she looked back at Midoriya, who seemed to have relaxed a bit. With determination, he clicked play, sinking deep into the couch as if trying to disappear. As the music filled the room, everything fell silent. Her parents were speechless, and a sense of peace enveloped them. The music had a somber yet hopeful tone, painting a scene of a sunset transitioning to night, where even as the sun faded, the moon offered a soft glow. She felt a wave of nostalgia wash over her, wondering why it felt so familiar. As she watched Midoriya fidgeting with his wrists, she noticed a purple and black 𝗟𝗶 band still on his wrist, and a smile crept onto her face. The memory of their first meeting came flooding back, clear as day, the bench on the hill, a notebook in her hand, and Midoriya sitting against a tree. The song concluded, and she felt a tear forming in her eye, quickly wiping it away before anyone noticed. Sitting up, she couldn't help but smile at the silence that followed. She could hear Midoriya's heart racing, but he had nothing to worry about. Her parents' silence meant they were impressed. Midoriya nervously asked how it was, keeping his head down. Her dad, with a serious expression, told him he had quite the talent and that it was great. He even mentioned needing Midoriya's help on future projects, offering him a warm smile. Midoriya looked up, surprised and hopeful, as her dad reassured him that it was all up to him if he wanted to collaborate. It was a moment of choice, and Midoriya found himself at a loss for words, simply nodding in response. Curiosity sparked as 𝐾𝐿 turned to face him, recalling the project he had been working on in the park. A faint blush crept onto his cheeks as he admitted that he thought it would be best to share it since she had seen him working on it. 𝐾𝐿 felt warmth rise in her own cheeks, realizing how glad she was to hear it. 𝐾𝐿's mother then inquired if the piece had a name, prompting 𝐾𝐿 to look back at Midoriya with interest. Midoriya tensed up, his nervousness palpable as he began to stammer through an explanation. 𝐾𝐿 leaned closer to the screen, teasingly guessing that the title might be something quirky like 𝗏𝐿𝐼𝐼. As she searched for the name, her face turned bright red when she finally found it. Her mother, noticing her reaction, asked what it was, and 𝐾𝐿 hesitantly revealed, 𝗟𝗶ℎ𝗸. The room fell silent once more, the weight of the moment hanging in the air. In an effort to lighten the mood, 𝐾𝐿's father suddenly shouted for a topic change, quickly redirecting the conversation to Midoriya's future in music. He suggested that they could make a great team, which caused 𝐾𝐿 to glare at him, feeling the suddenness of the suggestion was overwhelming. Her father, sensing the tension, joked that 𝐾𝐿 should calm down, albeit slightly. 𝐾𝐿's mother rolled her eyes and encouraged Midoriya to share his aspirations. He admitted that he had never given much thought to his future, but recent inquiries about his plans had made him reconsider. He had always assumed music would be his path, but a recent conversation reignited his childhood dream of becoming a hero. Everyone in the room looked at Midoriya, surprised by his admission. 𝐾𝐿 thought about how timid he was and whether he could truly pursue that dream. Her father leaned in, intrigued, and asked if he really wanted to be a hero without a quirk. Midoriya replied that one cannot help what the heart desires, keeping his gaze fixed on the floor. 𝐾𝐿's father placed a reassuring hand on Midoriya's shoulder, smiling as he complimented his determination and asked if he could borrow that line for a song. The atmosphere shifted, and a faint sniffle from Midoriya indicated the emotional weight of the moment. 𝐾𝐿 exchanged a knowing glance with her mother, both understanding that her father believed in Midoriya's potential. As the evening progressed, they enjoyed a movie and shared more music, with Midoriya appearing to have a good time, a slight smile lingering on his face. Eventually, the night came to an end, and 𝐾𝐿's father announced that it was time to wrap things up since school awaited them the next day. Midoriya, realizing the time, quickly gathered his belongings and expressed his gratitude for the enjoyable evening. 𝐾𝐿's mother suggested that his parents should join them next time, eager to meet them. Suddenly, Midoriya's bag fell to the floor, causing him to tense up again. 𝐾𝐿 approached him, concerned, and asked if everything was all right. He apologized, explaining that he must have moved too quickly and aggravated an old injury, chuckling weakly. 𝐾𝐿 sighed, sensing he was hiding something again. She playfully admonished him not to scare them like that and reiterated her longing to meet his parents. He hesitated, mentioning that they were often busy with work as he picked up his bag and headed toward the door, thanking them once more. 𝐾𝐿's mother playfully pointed out that it was unfair for Midoriya to address her by her first name while she was referred to as Mrs. 𝐿𝐲. Her father interjected, explaining that he had told Midoriya he could call him that, and suggested it would be confusing for everyone to use their last name. 𝐾𝐿's mother then offered that Midoriya could call her Mika, which he accepted, adding that Mrs. Mika would be fine. As Midoriya prepared to leave, 𝐾𝐿's father offered him a ride home, noting the late hour. 𝐾𝐿 agreed to join, standing up to follow him. However, her mother reminded them that someone needed to help clean up, asserting that 𝐾𝐿 would stay with her. Her father sighed, apologizing to 𝐾𝐿 for the change of plans. After a warm goodbye, Midoriya left, and 𝐾𝐿 felt a mix of emotions as the evening came to a close. I stood in front of the door for a moment, trying to process everything that had happened throughout the night. A hand rested on my shoulder, and I turned to see my mom beside me, her expression serious. She took a deep breath before looking down at me and expressed her uncertainty about why someone would lie to us. She acknowledged the stress and tension he had shown during the evening, noting her surprise at how long he managed to hold it together. I sighed, feeling the weight of her words. As I looked down at the ground, she suggested I go upstairs and prepare for bed, reminding me that I had school the next day. With a small laugh, I headed upstairs, acknowledging her point. Once in my room, I closed the door and noticed my bag was already packed and my school uniform hung on the closet door. I changed into my tank top and shorts, then climbed into bed, using my jack to turn off the lights. So much had happened that night, and I felt overwhelmed trying to make sense of it all. From Kyotoku's perspective, he asked the kid where they were headed as they got into the car. The response was Mizutofu, a location not too far away. The drive was quiet, not filled with awkwardness but rather a comfortable silence. The kid gazed out the window, and Kyotoku inquired about the burn he had. The kid replied that it was improving but still stung, and he mentioned the doctor's advice to take a break from school and physical activities for a week. As they approached a run-down apartment complex, Kyotoku confirmed they had arrived. The kid expressed gratitude for the evening, grabbed his bag, and exited the car. Kyotoku reminded him to reach out if he ever needed anything before the kid ascended the stairs to his apartment. The drive back home was swift, and upon arrival, Kyotoku found Mika on the couch. She expressed her surprise at his late return and kissed his cheek, asking how the evening had gone. He jokingly mentioned a minor mishap, and she playfully nudged him. 𝐾𝐞𝐭 shared his unease about the kid's living situation, feeling that something was off. Mika inquired about his plans, and he admitted there was little they could do, sinking into the couch with his hands over his eyes. She questioned whether he thought the kid was hiding something, to which he revealed that he was not as oblivious as they believed and could sense that something was indeed being concealed. Meanwhile, 𝐤𝐬 was still awake upstairs, having plugged in his jack to listen for his dad's return. He overheard the conversation and took out his phone to message Midoriya, expressing gratitude for his visit. They exchanged light banter, and 𝐤𝐬 mentioned needing to sleep early. After setting his alarm, he pulled the covers over himself and drifted off, wishing for a peaceful night's sleep. The next morning, 𝐤𝐬 pondered the strange dream he had involving talking food as he made his way to school. Plugging his jack into his phone, he was amused when the intro to Stevie Wonder's Superstition began to play. He jokingly addressed the universe, feeling that it was playing tricks on him. As he scrolled through his contacts, he called his mom, asking if she believed the universe had a sense of humor. His mom found his question odd but was concerned about him. 𝐤𝐬 hesitated before revealing the bizarre nature of his dream. She teased him about having dreams involving Midoriya, which he quickly denied, emphasizing the oddity of his dream about food. As their conversation continued, he shared how he felt unsettled by the song that played next, and his mom's playful remarks only added to his embarrassment. "You're not helping at all." Calmly, she reassured him that there was nothing to worry about, explaining that it was natural for kids his age to have dreams like that. She teased him further, suggesting that he was overthinking things and encouraged him to take a few deep breaths and enjoy his day. With that, she ended the call. He stared at his phone, contemplating whether to start his music again. After clicking the app on and off multiple times, he decided to shuffle his playlist, and Coldplay's Green Eyes began to play. He sighed and resumed his walk, reflecting on how the music seemed to resonate with his recent experiences. Upon arriving at the school gates, he checked the time on his phone. It was 8:15 and he still had some time. As he made his way to class, he sat at his desk and unplugged his headphones. He wondered how Midoriya was feeling that day and opened his messages, selecting Midoriya's name. 𝐤𝐬 sent a message asking if he was feeling any better. He looked up to see a friend approaching. "Hey, how was your weekend?" His friend replied that it was interesting, and he chuckled lightly while waiting for a response. "Really? Tell me all about it." She took a seat at the desk in front of him, resting her elbows on his desk. "It was nothing much," he said, glancing back at his phone. Still no reply. Maybe he hasn't seen it yet or his school is strict about phones. His friend gave him a curious look. "What's up?" "You first." "Seriously, you're acting a bit off." He took a deep breath, relaxing in his chair. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" "Not a chance," she replied with a playful smile, tilting her head. "Fine." He returned his attention to his phone, still seeing no reply. Have you ever talked to someone and felt they were hiding something painful, not just covering up for a mistake? So, like they're trying to protect themselves. She looked puzzled. Or maybe they're trying to protect others, he mused, biting his thumb as he considered his next words. I don't know why, but what they said didn't add up. Care to share? She leaned in, intrigued. Absolutely not. First, it's not my place to reveal what they said, and second, everyone knows you're the biggest gossip in this school. His friend laughed. Well, you can't blame a girl for trying. She turned back around. You know, 𝐤𝐬, I wouldn't worry too much. I'm sure they have their reasons, so don't dwell on it. Ignorance is bliss, after all. Ignorance is bliss, huh? Those words sparked an idea in his mind. Tsubaki, you're a genius. He quickly pulled out his notebook and began jotting down his thoughts. Tsubaki turned back, surprised. I am. He looked up from his notebook. Not really, but you just inspired a great idea. He continued writing, feeling a rush of excitement. How could I have missed this before? I can't wait for Friday now. Izuku's POV, he wondered why he was awake so early. Turning over, he checked his phone and realized he wasn't even going to school that day. He lay back, covering his eyes with his arms. Since he was awake, he decided to make the most of it. Sitting on the edge of his bed, he opened his nightstand and grabbed a bottle of whiskey, taking a quick sip before setting it down. As he surveyed his room, he realized it needed some tidying up. He took a deep breath, standing up despite the pain in his chest. This is going to get old fast, he thought, taking another sip before starting to clean. As he formed small piles of trash and clothes, he glanced at his desk and chuckled to himself as he exited the room with his clothes in hand. I can't believe I actually went through with that last night. A small grin spread across his face as he placed the clothes in the washer and started it. Last night was interesting, to say the least. As he walked through the halls, memories of the previous night replayed in his mind. He recalled sitting back in a chair, observing how families interacted. It was much different than with Auntie Mitsuki. They laughed and playfully teased each other, and he thought how much fun they seemed to have together. Everything all right, Midoriya? 𝐤𝐬 leaned in closer. Yeah, I was just thinking about how much fun you all have together. He offered a nervous laugh. Of course, we're a family, 𝐤𝐬𝐃𝐞𝐭 chimed in, giving him an odd look. Don't you and your family get along like this? He felt a pang of discomfort. Oh, he thought, reaching for a 𝗟𝗶𝗸 band to fidget with. Hey, why don't we start the movie before it gets too late? 𝐤𝐬 suggested with a smile as she stood up. He released the 𝗟𝗶𝗸 band and stood up. That was close. They made their way to what appeared to be a personal theater. Then, this must be nice, he thought. All right, everyone, we have a good one of my personal favorites, 𝐤𝐬𝐃𝐭 announced, beaming with excitement. He noticed 𝐤𝐬 trembling slightly. Leaning in, he whispered to her, everything all right? Yeah. I'm just not a big fan of scary movies. But my dad loves them. Apparently, when she said she wasn't a fan, she meant absolutely terrified. They were barely 10 minutes into the movie when 𝐤𝐬 had a tight grip on his arm or the pillow she was holding, unable to sit still as she turned away or buried her face in the pillow. He chuckled softly as he pulled on a hoodie that was halfway zipped. Who would have thought that little Miss Punk Rock would get scared so easily? But it was really cute seeing her like that. He gathered the remaining trash and a few empty bottles, heading toward the front door when he paused. Did I just say she looked cute? He shook his head while heading downstairs to the trash bin. She definitely was cute, so he wasn't wrong to think that. Not to mention those shorts had definitely worked for her last night. He quickly shook his head and focused again. He reminded himself to calm down and not get carried away. Upon reaching the bottom floor, he looked around and noticed a familiar car. He turned toward the dumpster and continued walking. They were really bad at spying. Did they think he wouldn't remember a silver car with "jacked up" painted on the hood? He tossed the trash into the dumpster and the bottles into the recycling bin. Why had they come here? It wasn't like there was anything to see. As he made his way back up the stairs, he pulled out his phone. It was 8 o'clock, so school should be starting soon. He wondered if he should let 𝐤𝐬 know who he had just seen. Looking over the railing as he reached his door, he glanced at the car one last time. No, he didn't want to cause them more trouble. Even he knew how 𝐤𝐬 got when she was upset, and he barely knew her. Back in his room, he sat down at his desk and decided to work on some new music. Everything was going great. It was a nice, calm day. Nothing could ruin this. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Aizawa was driving down the road, glancing at the passenger seat. His companion commented that he didn't have to come along for this. Aizawa dismissed the notion, stating that he would accompany him since one of his teachers needed the day off to talk to another school. The passenger looked out the window with a calm smile and asked what they were doing. Aizawa sighed as he focused back on the road, explaining that they were heading to 𝐼𝐻𝐷ra Junior High to check on a student he had found on patrol last week. The passenger recalled the boy who claimed to be quirkless but actually had a quirk he wished he didn't possess. Aizawa confirmed this, expressing his concern for the boy's situation. He had promised to turn in the boy's doctor's notes and wanted to see what the school was like. Aizawa tightened his grip on the steering wheel, noting that he wanted to ensure the school treated the boy fairly and didn't dismiss his story. The passenger remarked that it was unusual for Aizawa to become so invested in someone who wasn't his student. Aizawa explained that the boy had faced more challenges than anyone his age should have to endure, and based on what he had learned, it seemed Those challenges wouldn't end anytime soon. The passenger found this intriguing and asked about the boy's quirk. 𝐼𝐬𝐬 scratched his head, admitting he had never seen anything like it before and that the boy would have to explain it himself. The passenger smirked, realizing 𝐼𝐬𝐬 planned to stop by the boy's house for more questions. The rest of the drive to 𝐼𝐻𝐷RA was peaceful. Upon arriving at the school, it appeared to be a typical middle school, nothing out of the ordinary. They entered and were immediately stopped by a staff member who inquired about their business. 𝐼𝐬𝐬 reassured the staff that they were there to deliver a doctor's note for a student. As they made their way through the halls, 𝐼𝐬𝐬 noted that nothing stood out about the school. Based on what the boy had said, he had expected it to be chaotic. The passenger asked if something was wrong, but 𝐼𝐬𝐬 simply replied that he was just thinking. Eventually, they found the teacher's lounge and knocked on the door. A woman opened it, looking confused as she greeted them. 𝐼𝐬𝐬 explained their purpose, pulling out the doctor's notes to show her they were legitimate. She quickly offered to help them find the student, asking for his name. 𝐼𝐬𝐬 provided the name Izuku Midoriya and waited as she searched her computer. After a few moments, she informed them that Izuku was in class 2C, located on the next floor, halfway down on the right. They thanked her and began to leave when she mentioned that pets weren't allowed on campus. 𝐼𝐬𝐬 looked down at his companion, who clarified that he was not a pet but rather 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐸, the principal, and that he just looked a little odd due to his quirk. The woman apologized for her assumption and bowed, and they continued on their way. As they walked through the halls, 𝐼𝐬𝐬 admitted he had never figured out what 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐸 was, to which 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐸 replied that it didn't matter since he was still the principal. They reached the room labeled 2C and knocked on the door. When invited in, they stepped inside, and 𝐼𝐬𝐬 explained that they needed to discuss one of the students. The teacher expressed concern, hoping the student hadn't caused any trouble. He asked for their names, and 𝐼𝐬𝐬 introduced himself and 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐸, mentioning they were from UA. The teacher was surprised to hear they were from UA, noting that they had never had a student from their school make it there before. 𝐼𝐬𝐬 clarified that they were there to talk about Izuku Midoriya. The teacher seemed unfamiliar with the name, prompting 𝐼𝐬𝐬 to describe the boy, messy green hair and diamond-shaped freckles on his face. The teacher still appeared puzzled, leaving 𝐼𝐬𝐬 to wonder how they would proceed from here. The frustration was palpable as the teacher expressed disbelief about a student named Midoriya. The teacher had noted that Midoriya achieved perfect scores on every test, even when faced with questions not covered in class. Despite the teacher's insistence that Midoriya must be cheating, 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐸, the small creature accompanying the teacher, questioned whether the student might simply be studying harder than others. The teacher remained unconvinced, pointing out that Midoriya often appeared disengaged, wearing headphones while taking notes. The conversation shifted when the teacher was informed that Midoriya had been found unconscious in an alley. The teacher's dismissive attitude suggested he believed the student was a lost cause, which only fueled the anger of the visitor. They had come to deliver a doctor's note, indicating that Midoriya would be absent and required to avoid physical activity for a week. The visitor insisted that the teacher ensure these recommendations were followed before they left. Once outside, the visitor expressed frustration at the teacher's attitude, feeling that Midoriya had never been given a fair chance. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐸 pondered the situation and decided to accompany the visitor to check on Midoriya. Meanwhile, Midoriya was startled by a knock on his door early that Monday morning. He shuffled out of his room, grumbling about the interruption, and opened the door to find Mr. 𝐼𝐬𝐬 standing there, accompanied by 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐸. After a brief moment of confusion, Midoriya invited them inside and led them to the living room, where he sensed they were quietly assessing his home. Mr. 𝐼𝐬𝐬𝐬 explained that they had come to deliver Midoriya's doctor's note and mentioned an interesting discussion with his homeroom teacher. Midoriya listened intently, feeling a mix of embarrassment and relief as 𝐼𝐬𝐬𝐬 revealed that the teacher had not even recognized him until his quirkless status was mentioned. The teacher had also accused Midoriya of cheating on tests, which prompted a defensive response from him. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐸, curious about the situation, asked Midoriya directly if he cheated. Midoriya denied it, feeling frustrated that no one would believe him. 𝐒𝐮𝐸𝐸 then presented a set of 10 vague questions for Midoriya to answer, which he found intriguing. As he completed the questions, he noticed Mr. 𝐼𝐬𝐬𝐬's bored expression contrasted with 𝐒𝐮𝐸𝐸's smile. After finishing, Midoriya handed the paper to 𝐒𝐮𝐬, who thanked him and tucked it away. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 then inquired about Midoriya's quirk, which had been mentioned but not explained. Midoriya hesitated, feeling the weight of the question. He took a deep breath and revealed that his quirk allowed him to make people relive their most traumatic experiences, even altering those memories to make them worse. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 listened intently, understanding the burden that such a quirk would carry. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 looked at me with curiosity and asked if I could provide an example of how my quirk worked. I hesitated, feeling a bit confused. He assured me that Mr. 𝐼𝐬𝐬 was willing to let me demonstrate on him. I glanced at Mr. 𝐼𝐬𝐬, who simply nodded in agreement. I then asked Mr. 𝐼𝐬𝐬 to share a traumatic memory, one that still affected him. He nodded thoughtfully, but before he could respond, 𝐒𝐮𝐬 questioned the necessity of sharing a memory. I explained that when I activated my quirk, I could see orbs floating around people, each colored differently based on the trauma associated with their experiences. If I was familiar with the incident, the orb would have a title, helping me identify it. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 found this information intriguing and remarked on the potential of my quirk, suggesting that with time, I could gather a vast library of someone's worst moments. I clarified that the individuals were unaware of my knowledge. To them, it would merely be a flashback, while I could observe it unfold without physical interaction. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 expressed his admiration for my abilities, and I felt a sense of pride at his words. I turned back to Mr. 𝐼𝐬𝐬, asking if he was ready. He confirmed he was, recalling a time in high school when he had sparred with a classmate whose quirk allowed him to project his voice at high frequencies. During their match, Mr. 𝐼𝐬𝐬 misjudged a throw with his scarf, accidentally tightening it around his classmate's throat. He quickly released it, but the incident left him shaken, fearing he had jeopardized his friend's future as a hero. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 inquired if this memory would suffice for my demonstration. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes, focusing on Mr. 𝐼𝐬𝐬. When I opened them, I saw the orbs surrounding him and spotted one labeled, "Mic dropped." I nodded to 𝐒𝐮𝐬, indicating I was ready to proceed. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 climbed onto the couch and then onto my head, suggesting that since I needed to touch the orbs, he might be able to join me in the memory. I found his position amusing but focused on the task at hand. With determination, I reached for the orb, hesitating briefly before finally making contact. Suddenly, I found myself in a gym, observing two teenagers engaged in a sparring match. I stepped closer, intrigued by the unfolding action. 𝐒𝐮𝐬, now beside me, expressed surprise at our successful entry into the memory. He then asked if I could alter what happened during the fight, specifically the moment Mr. 𝐼𝐬𝐬 had only bruised his friend's throat. I concentrated, raising my hand and snapping my fingers, hoping to see the effects of my alteration. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 watched intently as the fight continued. Mr. 𝐼𝐬𝐬 skillfully avoided an attack and seized an opportunity to wrap his scarf around his opponent's neck. The tension escalated as he pulled, and his classmate fell to the ground. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 and I moved closer to the scene, and I explained that my alteration had caused a more severe injury, leaving Mr. 𝐼𝐬𝐬's friend unable to speak or use his quirk. As we reached the center of the room, Mr. 𝐼𝐬𝐬 appeared panicked, calling for help. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 asked what would happen next, and I explained that we would be pulled from the memory, returning to the couch, but with Mr. 𝐼𝐬𝐬 likely in distress. I suggested we break the false memory by showing him something that would reveal the truth. In an instant, we were back in my apartment, sitting quietly on the couch. Mr. 𝐼𝐬𝐬 broke the silence, expressing his guilt over ruining his friend's dreams. 𝐒𝐮𝐬, stepping off my head, approached him and pulled out his phone, offering reassurance. He played a message from Mr. 𝐼𝐬𝐬's friend, who was excitedly discussing a new idea for a subject called the art of the DJ. The students often assisted with the radio show, and while I taught them various skills, the main benefit was reducing costs. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 closed his phone and took a seat beside Mr. 𝐼𝐬𝐬, reassuring him that everything was fine. Mr. 𝐼𝐬𝐬, still wiping away the remnants of his tears, admitted he was unsure of what had come over him. I confessed that my quirk had altered his memories, expressing my regret about having it. They exchanged understanding glances, and Mr. 𝐼𝐬𝐬 turned to me, asking if I had considered our previous conversation. I mentioned that I had opened up to a girl and her family, sharing some of my music and revealing my quirkless status. I also expressed my longing to pursue a hero course, glancing at the pictures turned away on the wall. Mr. Izuku acknowledged my progress with a small smile and presented me with another idea. He suggested that if I was serious about becoming a hero, I could leave my current situation and stay with him. I returned his smile, promising to think about it. After thanking us for our time, Nizu and Mr. Izuku stood up to leave. I followed them, feeling pleasantly surprised by how well the conversation had gone. Mr. Izuku handed me a piece of paper, asking me to call him once I made a decision. After they exited, I closed the door and chuckled to myself, reflecting on the whirlwind of the past few days. I lay down on my bed and checked my phone, noticing a message from 𝐤𝐬. She asked if I was feeling better, and I replied that I was, albeit a little overwhelmed. I decided to head to the park to gather my thoughts. The park was surprisingly quiet for midday. As I walked to my favorite spot, the music in my head blended with the serene scenery. It was a stark contrast to the chaos swirling within me. Reaching my usual bench, I shook my head and opted to sit against a tree instead, sighing at the stress of life. Looking down the hill, I saw a family enjoying a picnic, and a small smile appeared on my face before it faded into a frown. I lamented the unfairness of life, feeling deprived of a chance at normalcy. I observed the family for a while, noting their laughter and carefree moments. Their child played joyfully, and the parents watched with smiles. I sighed, realizing that life was rarely fair. Checking my phone again, I saw another message from 𝐤𝐬, asking if everything was all right. I smiled, acknowledging that not everything was entirely unfair. I admitted to her that I had a lot on my mind. As I closed my eyes, letting the music wash over me, I contemplated the recent events. Things seemed to be improving and I finally had choices. Watching the family pack up to leave, I reflected on how I might have missed out on my biological family, but I could still create a new one in the future. 𝐤𝐬 offered her support, reminding me she was there if I needed someone to talk to. I chuckled at her familiar words, appreciating her friendship. I set my phone down, gazing at the sky as I pondered my next steps. I retrieved the paper Mr. Izuku had given me, considering the opportunity it presented. I wondered if pursuing this path would mean sacrificing my current friendships, particularly with 𝐤𝐬. Just then I heard a familiar voice. Auntie Mitsuki approached, asking what I was doing there. She sat beside me, placing a hand on my head and expressing her concern since I had been discharged from the hospital. I looked down, wondering how she knew I was at the park. She reassured me that she had known me my whole life and was familiar with my habits. When she pressed me about my thoughts, I hesitated, claiming nothing was wrong. But she gently insisted I share, playfully tapping my head. I glanced at her, annoyance flickering in my eyes, but her smile softened my mood. I returned my gaze to the spot where the family had been, admitting that a lot had happened recently and I felt lost. Mitsuki inquired if my confusion stemmed from the previous night. I revealed that I had told the family about being quirkless, sensing her disappointment even without looking up. Yet they had accepted me and encouraged me to pursue my dreams. She asked why that left me feeling uncertain, and I confessed that I was unsure of what my dream truly was anymore. Back when Izuku was younger, he dreamed of becoming a hero, but he felt limited by his current situation. He hugged his knees tightly, expressing his love for music and his belief that he was quite talented at it. Auntie Mitsuki reassured him that he had plenty of time to make a decision and there was no need to rush. Izuku's grip on his knees tightened as he hesitated to share his thoughts. Auntie Mitsuki looked at him with curiosity, wondering what he meant. He recalled the hero who had driven him home recently and mentioned that the hero and a friend had checked on him that morning. The hero had offered him a chance to stay with him if he was serious about pursuing the hero course. However, Izuku also had connections with a family he had spent time with the previous night, who were involved in music and had offered to introduce him to important people in the industry. After a moment of silence, Auntie Mitsuki placed her hand on his head, expressing her love for him. She acknowledged the challenges he had faced and reassured him that she would support his dreams, whether he chose to leave or pursue music. She embraced him warmly, but Izuku admitted he was scared. He feared losing the first friend he had made in a long time. Auntie Mitsuki lifted his chin gently, reminding him that friendships could endure even if paths diverged. She expressed a longing to meet the man he might stay with if he chose to leave. Izuku leaned back against the tree and handed her the note with the hero's number, feeling a mix of apprehension and relief. Auntie Mitsuki praised him for being smart and not making her pry the information from him. Izuku chuckled lightly, acknowledging that it had taken him a long time to reach this point. He checked his phone and saw a message from 𝐤𝐬, who mentioned that her lunch break was ending and they would talk later. Izuku felt a sense of anticipation about their plans for Friday after school. Auntie Mitsuki teased him about having another date, but he quickly clarified that they were just going to the music store to look at guitars. She playfully ruffled his hair, eager to see Katsuki's reaction when she told him about Izuku's plans. Izuku felt a chill at the thought and asked her not to mention it, his hands trembling as he tucked them into his jacket pockets. Seeing his unease, Auntie Mitsuki stood up and offered her hand, suggesting they go get lunch together. He accepted her hand and stood up, feeling grateful for her support. She mentioned how it had been a while since they had shared a meal, and she expressed curiosity about the girl he was meeting on Friday, joking about the possibility of grandchildren. Izuku insisted that it wasn't like that, but Auntie Mitsuki playfully dismissed his protests, urging him to hurry as they left the park. In 𝐤𝐬's perspective, she felt a sense of relief as the class finally came to an end. She stretched and began packing her books while chatting with Tsubaki, who commented on how the day had dragged on. 𝐤𝐬 checked her phone and smiled at a message from Izuku, confirming their plans for Friday. Tsubaki playfully interrupted her thoughts, teasing her about having a date. 𝐤𝐬 felt flustered and tried to downplay the situation, explaining that she had met Izuku by chance and that nothing romantic was happening between them. Tsubaki, however, was skeptical and pressed her for details, making 𝐤𝐬 feel even more flustered. As they left the classroom, 𝐤𝐬 realized she had inadvertently revealed too much about their plans. She quickly tried to retract her statement, but Tsubaki was amused and promised to keep teasing her about it. They made their way to the front gate, and Tsubaki waved goodbye as she headed home. The walk home was peaceful for 𝐤𝐬, with nothing unusual occurring. The music she loved accompanied her, creating a perfect soundtrack to her day. Everything felt right, and she embraced the blissful moment as she strolled down the street. The rest of the wall seemed to fly by, and soon 𝐾𝐞𝐭 found herself standing at her front door. As she reached to open it, a chill ran down her spine. Something felt off. She glanced around for a moment before stepping inside. Her mother was sitting on the couch with a cup of tea. Upon seeing 𝐾𝐿, she appeared confused. 𝐾𝐿 removed her shoes and set her bag by the door. She mentioned feeling a strange sense of foreboding just before entering, then took a seat on the couch across from her mother. Her mother observed her thoughtfully, taking a sip of tea. She noted that 𝐾𝐿 had been having quite a few unusual feelings lately. 𝐾𝐿, curious, asked what gave her that impression. Her mother reminded her of their conversation that morning, raising an eyebrow in inquiry. 𝐾𝐿 hesitated, feeling that familiar chill again. She realized she needed to divert the conversation. She asked if her father was home, hoping he would interrupt and change the subject. The room fell silent for a moment before her mother chuckled softly. She had ensured that her husband wouldn't return until she was ready to call him. With a playful smirk, she insisted that it was just the two of them and urged 𝐾𝐿 to share her dream. 𝐾𝐿 felt cornered but tried to downplay the situation, claiming her dream was about food. Her mother wasn't convinced and pressed her for details, especially about a dream involving Midoriya. 𝐾𝐿 felt trapped, but she glanced around the room for an escape. Her mother's gaze was unwavering, and she knew she had to answer. She reluctantly admitted that the dream involved her and Midoriya, hinting at a moment where he was about to kiss her. Her mother leaned closer, intrigued, and asked for more details. 𝐾𝐿, feeling embarrassed, finally revealed that in the dream, they were married, and Midoriya mentioned the challenges of her 𝐼𝐴𝐼𝐻. Her mother found the revelation amusing, expressing surprise at 𝐾𝐿's feelings. 𝐾𝐿 felt overwhelmed, unsure of what to do next. Her mother encouraged her to reflect on what Midoriya meant to her, suggesting that understanding that would help clarify her feelings. 𝐾𝐿 appreciated her mother's support but felt frustrated by her own uncertainty. Her mother embraced her, reassuring her that she would figure it out in time. 𝐾𝐿 felt grateful and stood up to head upstairs, hoping to resolve her feelings before Friday. Curious, her mother asked what was special about Friday. 𝐾𝐿 explained she was meeting Midoriya at the music store to look at guitars. Her mother's excitement was palpable, but their moment was interrupted when 𝐾𝐿's father barged in, demanding to know what was happening. 𝐾𝐿 confronted her mother about her father's early return, feeling betrayed. Her mother admitted to lying about his arrival, explaining that she wanted to ensure 𝐾𝐿 would open up. Her father, confused and seeking answers, felt left out of the conversation. 𝐾𝐿, frustrated, decided to retreat to her room, needing time to think. Meanwhile, Izuku was making his way back to his apartment after class. He put on his headphones, letting the music envelop him as he walked. Today was significant. He was supposed to meet with Mr. Izuku alongside Auntie Mitsuki. As he navigated the streets, he reflected on his life, amused by how far he had come. However, a nagging voice in his mind questioned his worthiness, causing him to pause and remove a headphone. Confusion washed over him as he continued his walk, feeling a heaviness in his chest. It felt strange as the protagonist made their way back, trying to shake off the haunting voice echoing in their mind. The voice taunted them, insisting they would never succeed and were merely wasting their time. With each step, the protagonist quickened their pace, weaving through the crowd, desperate to return home. The voices continued, each one a reminder of their perceived failures and worthlessness. As they sprinted through the throng of people, the protagonist felt an overwhelming urge to escape. They began to slow down, searching for a place to hide, frustration bubbling within. They wondered why these thoughts were resurfacing now, of all times. Finding an alley, they ducked in and sat down, pulling out a flask to take a few swigs. Leaning back, they gazed at the sky, reflecting on the voices that had resurfaced after so long. Clutching their legs tightly, they trembled, questioning why this was happening today. Burying their face in their knees, they tried to calm themselves, taking deep breaths before finally looking up at the wall in front of them. They clenched their fists, reminding themselves to take things one step at a time. Just as they began to stand, their phone buzzed, prompting them to check a message from Auntie Mitsuki, reminding them of a meeting at their apartment later. Sinking back down, they pulled their knees to their chest, contemplating the evening ahead. The thought of the impending meeting filled them with dread, as they worried about the potential conflict between the attendees. The voices returned, echoing their fears and insecurities, intensifying their anxiety. Despite their attempts to silence the negativity, tears began to fall as they fought against the overwhelming feelings of worthlessness. Determined to push back against the voices, the protagonists stood and pressed their head against the wall, feeling a surge of frustration. They struck the wall, trying to drown out the taunts, but the voices persisted, reminding them of their isolation. With each punch, they sought to escape the truth they feared. Just as they prepared to strike again, their phone buzzed, causing them to pause. Looking at their hand, they noticed a small injury, prompting a curse under their breath. Taking care to clean the wound, they felt a mix of pain and calm as the alcohol stung. After wrapping their hand, they leaned against the wall, feeling the world around them steady. They took a moment to collect themselves before grabbing their bag and heading back to the street. Eventually, they reached their apartment, tossing their bag aside and retreating to their room. They turned on some music and gathered a change of clothes before heading to the shower. After unwrapping the gauze from their hand, they examined their reflection, noting their disheveled appearance. A small chuckle escaped them as they prepared for the shower, acknowledging their current state. The hot water cascaded over them, bringing both relief and discomfort to their wounds. They closed their eyes, allowing the water to wash away the tension as they mentally prepared for the evening ahead. The sound of music blended with the splashing water, creating a soothing atmosphere. As they opened their eyes, they noticed the scar on their chest, a reminder of past struggles. A faint smile appeared as they touched it, reflecting on their journey. They chuckled softly, recognizing the irony of their situation. Just as they stepped out of the shower, their phone buzzed again with a message from Auntie Mitsuki, indicating she was on her way. Sighing, They glanced at the mirror, realizing it was time to get ready. They wrapped their hand again, ensuring the cuts were covered before noticing another message notification. Picking up the phone, they opened it, feeling a mix of emotions as they prepared for the evening ahead. 𝐤𝐬 felt a sense of boredom and decided to reach out to Midoriya, suggesting they meet at the park. Midoriya, however, was preoccupied, having just received a message indicating he had to change the wrapping on his chest. 𝐤𝐬 expressed her concern, asking about the severity of his burn. Midoriya contemplated sharing a picture of his injury, thinking it might not be so bad after all, as it would leave a scar, but he found it somewhat cool. As he wrapped his chest, he felt a sense of relief that he could move without pain. After finishing, he returned to his room and began flipping through an old notebook filled with memories of his dreams and aspirations. Each page sparked nostalgia, bringing a smile to his face as he recalled the hero names and costume designs he once admired. However, he noticed a torn page, which caused his smile to fade. He leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes, and when he opened them again, the visions of floating orbs filled his mind. He reached for a purple orb but hesitated before touching it, letting out a sigh. When he opened his eyes again, the orbs had vanished. After a moment of silence, his phone buzzed, breaking his concentration. 𝐤𝐬's message startled him, questioning why he was in a towel. Midoriya realized his mistake and felt embarrassment wash over him, slamming his head on the desk in frustration. 𝐤𝐬 continued to tease him, pointing out that she hadn't expected to see him in such a state. Midoriya promised to give her a heads-up next time, but 𝐤𝐬 playfully suggested he might be implying he would do it again. Feeling the need to tidy up before their friends arrived, Midoriya stood and began straightening the living room. Once satisfied with the appearance, he sat down and put on some music, pulling out his phone again. 𝐤𝐬 inquired about the size of his scar, and Midoriya explained it would be noticeable but smaller than expected. She then asked about his hand, to which he replied it was nothing. Midoriya hesitated to share more details, ultimately deciding against it and sinking into the couch. Just then, Auntie Mitsuki entered, reminding him to wear 𝗟𝗡s. He reassured her he was dressed appropriately, suggesting she could have knocked first. As he responded to 𝐤𝐬's message, Mitsuki playfully ruffled his hair, teasing him about his feelings for 𝐤𝐬. Midoriya felt a bit tense but acknowledged that opening up to someone was a significant step for him. Mitsuki encouraged him to express his feelings before it was too late, and with that, she headed into the living room to prepare for the evening. An hour later, everything was set, and as Midoriya locked his door, a knock echoed through the house. He opened the door to find Mr. Izuku and Principal Nizu standing there. After welcoming them inside, he apologized for the late visit, but they assured him it was no trouble at all. They entered the living room, where Auntie Mitsuki greeted them warmly, introducing herself as Midoriya's guardian. The group settled into their respective couches, and Auntie Mitsuki leaned forward with curiosity. She inquired about Nizu's position, to which he revealed that he was the principal at UA, and Mr. Izuku was one of the teachers there. Auntie Mitsuki's eyes widened in surprise as she processed the information, realizing the significance of UA as a renowned national school. Nizu confirmed her suspicions with a smile, and Auntie Mitsuki expressed her shock. Mr. Izuku then interjected, suggesting they focus on the matter at hand to avoid wasting anyone's time. Auntie Mitsuki quickly shifted her attention back to the topic, mentioning that Izuku had told her about the possibility of moving in with Mr. Izuku to pursue the hero course. Their gazes locked, and Mr. Izuku affirmed her statement. Auntie Mitsuki voiced her concerns, admitting she knew little about Mr. Izuku, despite his status as a pro-hero. She expressed her discomfort with the idea of Izuku moving in with someone she barely knew. Mr. Izuku acknowledged her feelings but emphasized that it was unreasonable to expect complete trust after just one meeting. He proposed that they reach some understanding that evening. Intrigued, Auntie Mitsuki asked what he meant. Mr. Izuku leaned in, maintaining eye contact, and stated that Midoriya needed to leave his current school after the semester. Auntie Mitsuki appeared puzzled and questioned his reasoning. Mr. Izuku explained that, as a teacher, he had seen how the school viewed Midoriya as a lost cause. He glanced at Izuku, suggesting that he could confirm this. Auntie Mitsuki turned her gaze to Izuku, who nodded in response to her silent inquiry. She sighed and returned her attention to Mr. Izuku, revealing that she had considered other schools but feared Izuku would face similar treatment elsewhere. She had kept him at his current school because he had established friendships there, including with her own son. Mr. Izuku acknowledged her concerns but argued that a change could provide Izuku with a fresh start and a second chance. He looked to Nizu, noting that while it might be just as challenging at UA, it could also be an opportunity for growth. Auntie Mitsuki then asked why they were interested in Izuku, recalling that he mentioned they would take him in if he pursued the hero course. Mr. Izuku spoke about Midoriya's good heart and how, despite the challenges he faced, he deserved a chance to pursue his dreams. He offered to train Izuku over the next year and a half, taking responsibility for his studies as well. Nizu chimed in, assuring Auntie Mitsuki that the entire responsibility wouldn't fall solely on Mr. Izuku. Many staff members were eager to support Izuku. He expressed his own willingness to teach him. Auntie Mitsuki raised a hypothetical scenario about Izuku not being accepted into the hero course. Mr. Izuku explained that there were other hero courses available, and if Izuku didn't qualify, he could still attend UA's general course, which was prestigious regardless of the path he chose. Auntie Mitsuki expressed her concerns about Izuku competing against those with quirks, reminding them that he was born quirkless. She placed a hand on his head, worried about his prospects. Mr. Izuku, however, confidently stated that he believed Midoriya possessed a quirk, having witnessed its potential firsthand. He emphasized that heroism wasn't solely about strength, it was about how one utilized their abilities. With training, Izuku could outmaneuver many opponents, and the perception of him being quirkless could serve as an advantage. Auntie Mitsuki acknowledged that she should have anticipated their awareness of Izuku's quirk. Mr. Izuku reiterated that they aimed to help him refine his abilities to become a person who could assist others. Nizu added that they wanted to support Izuku in becoming the best version of himself. Auntie Mitsuki then questioned why they wouldn't take care of Izuku if he chose not to pursue the hero course. Mr. Izuku clarified that they believed Izuku already had a support system in place, and it wouldn't be beneficial to remove him from that environment unless he was committed to training as a hero. He emphasized that surrounding him with people who could guide him would be more logical in that scenario. Izuku met her gaze, maintaining a calm demeanor. Auntie Mitsuki lowered her eyes, resting her chin on her hand. She expressed her understanding of the situation, acknowledging her trust in Izuku's ability to help Izuku achieve his dreams, but she struggled to trust Izuku's well-being to him. Izuku stood up, visibly shocked by her words. Auntie Mitsuki continued, sharing her deep emotional connection to Izuku. She recalled the day she received a call about his hospitalization, the fear that gripped her, and the overwhelming relief when she heard his voice again. She wrapped her arm around him, emphasizing her promise to support him, even if it meant he had to leave. Izuku found it hard to respond, tears welling in his eyes as Auntie Mitsuki held him close. Mr. Izuku stood up, bowing respectfully before lifting Nizu onto his shoulders. He thanked them for their honesty but noted that it was getting late and they didn't want to overstay their welcome. Both Auntie Mitsuki and Izuku returned the bow, expressing their gratitude for the visit and promising to discuss everything before making a decision. Mr. Izuku reminded them that the semester ended next month, suggesting it would be better for Izuku to start at the beginning of a semester rather than in the middle. Nizu chimed in, assuring them he had already developed some excellent lesson plans. Izuku smiled, thanking them as they prepared to leave. Mr. Izuku wished him safety as they walked away. Once the door closed, they returned to the living room and sat down. Izuku asked Auntie Mitsuki how she thought the meeting went, resting his head down. She expressed her admiration for their confidence, noting they weren't intimidated by her questions. Izuku agreed, finding that impressive. He hesitated before asking if she truly meant what she had said earlier. Auntie Mitsuki confirmed her feelings but admitted she might have exaggerated some parts. When she mentioned thinking of him as her own child, she placed a hand on his head, reinforcing the bond they shared. She assured him that he was part of her family, regardless of their different backgrounds. Izuku felt tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed by emotions he hadn't experienced in years. Auntie Mitsuki comforted him, encouraging him to let it all out. After a few moments, She gently lifted his chin and suggested they talk about a girl to lighten the mood. Izuku was confused by the sudden shift in conversation, but Auntie Mitsuki insisted he share about her. He mentioned her name was 𝐾𝐭𝐚𝐲 and that they were the same age. Auntie Mitsuki playfully urged him to share more details, ruffling his hair. Izuku mumbled something about 𝐼𝐻𝐬's violet hair, trying to deflect the conversation. Auntie Mitsuki, however, saw through his attempts and pressed for more information. Izuku described her caring nature, recalling how she had been worried about him during his hospital stay. Auntie Mitsuki looked at him with surprise, unable to believe he didn't see the obvious signs of 𝐼𝐻𝐬's feelings for him. She playfully smacked the back of his head, urging him to recognize the connection. Despite his confusion, Izuku tried to rationalize their friendship, but Auntie Mitsuki insisted that 𝐼𝐻𝐬's concern for him went beyond that of a typical friend. She challenged him to consider how he would view the situation if it were two other people. Izuku finally acknowledged that it seemed like one person had feelings for the other. Auntie Mitsuki pressed further, suggesting that the two people in question were him and 𝐼𝐻𝐬. Izuku raised an eyebrow, waiting for her response. She expressed her frustration at his lack of awareness, insisting that 𝐼𝐻𝐬 had feelings for him. That was surprising. She only saw him as a good friend. He looked at her, puzzled. She sighed and shook her head, calling him hopeless. She then asked if he and 𝐼𝐻𝐬 were hanging out the next day. He confirmed that they were, but he looked away, feeling uncertain. She suggested he call her to confirm, smirking slightly. He took out his phone, staring at it for a moment before glancing back at Auntie Mitsuki. He wondered why he couldn't just text her like usual. She playfully tapped the back of his head, insisting he should call. He rubbed the spot where she had tapped and took a deep breath, agreeing to make the call. He opened his phone, found 𝐼𝐻𝐬's contact, and called her, putting the phone on speaker. Auntie Mitsuki promised to stay quiet this time, giving him a gentle smile. They listened as the phone rang, the atmosphere in the room growing tense with anticipation. When 𝐼𝐻𝐬 answered, he greeted her nervously. She immediately questioned his earlier behavior, and he apologized, explaining that something had come up. She asked if everything was all right, and he assured her that it was just some unexpected visitors. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 expressed her frustration at his vague response, admitting she thought something was wrong. He apologized again, realizing his mistake. She laughed, calling him a bit foolish. He glanced at Auntie Mitsuki, who was trying to suppress a laugh. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 then asked why he called out of the blue. He hesitated, looking back at Auntie Mitsuki, who was nodding encouragingly. He finally mentioned wanting to confirm their plans for after class the next day. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 seemed confused, not recalling their arrangement to visit the music store together to pick out a guitar. Feeling disheartened, he looked down, but Auntie Mitsuki placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. She tried to smile, but he could see her concern. He quickly dismissed his earlier statement, suggesting it must have been a misunderstanding. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 laughed again, teasing him about being easy to trick. He felt relieved. When she confirmed they were still on for their plans, playfully apologizing for leading him on. They both expressed excitement for the next day, and Auntie Mitsuki affectionately ruffled his hair before saying goodnight. After hanging up, Auntie Mitsuki hugged him tightly, declaring that he officially had a date. He protested, insisting it was just a figure of speech, but she encouraged him to consider it more seriously. He reflected on how unexpected this situation was for him. Auntie Mitsuki stood up, preparing to leave, reminding him not to stay up too late. He agreed, following her to the door. She inquired if the music store was downtown, smirking at him. He rolled his eyes, realizing she was curious to see 𝐼𝐻𝐬. She playfully warned him that she would meet 𝐼𝐻𝐬 someday, but he insisted it would be on his own terms. As she stepped out, she pulled him into another hug, expressing her pride in his growth. He felt a mix of embarrassment and warmth as she complimented him. After she left, he returned to his room and flopped onto his bed, noticing an unread message from 𝐼𝐻𝐬. She apologized for teasing him and mentioned looking forward to their time together. She suggested they could hang out at the park afterward if he didn't have other plans. He chuckled to himself, realizing Auntie Mitsuki might have been right. He picked up his phone and typed back that it sounded good, confirming their plans. He plugged in his phone and stared at the ceiling, hoping the school day would pass quickly, feeling a mix of anticipation and nervousness about what was to come. Meanwhile, 𝐤𝐼 was in her own world of thoughts, feeling anxious about the implications of their plans. She buried her face in her knees, questioning her own feelings and whether she should dress up for their outing. She wondered if he saw it as a date and if she liked him, feeling confused about her emotions. He was undeniably kind, and his hair looked soft enough to rest on. He genuinely cared for others and created appealing music. Not to mention, he looked good without a shirt, and that scar added a certain allure. 𝐾𝐞𝐭 found herself lost in thought, questioning her own feelings. He wasn't an idiot, he was just socially awkward and meant no harm. Yet, she wondered if there was more to him than met the eye. She bit her lip, contemplating how little she truly knew about his life beyond the surface. Closing her eyes, she envisioned him clearly, recalling the scars on his arms and the one on his chest. His green eyes often sparkled like emeralds, but at times, they seemed clouded and lifeless, deepening the mystery surrounding Midoriya. Suddenly, 𝐾𝐿 was jolted back to reality by her mother tapping her on the head with a jack. She sat up quickly, glancing around the living room to find her mother standing before her. "Is everything all right?" her mother asked, kneeling down to meet her gaze. "I should be asking you that," her mother continued, unwrapping the jack from 𝐾𝐿's fingers. "I've been calling you for a minute, but you seemed lost in thought." "Sorry, I was just thinking," 𝐾𝐿 replied, rubbing the back of her head. "Is that so? What could possibly be on your mind this early?" Her mother smirked playfully. "Or should I say who? What are you getting at?" 𝐾𝐿 shot her a cold stare. "𝐾𝐿, I know you better than you know yourself," her mother said, closing her eyes with a smile. "If that's the case, what am I thinking right now?" 𝐾𝐿 rolled her eyes slightly. Her mother pouted before standing up. "You're thinking about that Midoriya boy again." "Just a lucky guess," 𝐾𝐿 groaned under her breath. "You really like him if he's on your mind this early," her mother said, sitting next to her and leaning in slightly. "So, what's the issue this time?" "We're meeting up after school to look at guitars, then maybe going to the park," 𝐾𝐿 admitted, burying her face in her knees. "Oh, is this a date?" her mother squealed with excitement. "No. Maybe. I don't know." 𝐾𝐿 tossed her head back, staring at the ceiling. "We talked last night to confirm our plans, and as I was about to hang up, I said, it's a date. Later, he texted the same thing. Now I'm confused." Her mother stared at her blankly before taking a deep breath. "Why are you so worried? It seems pretty clear to me that it's a date." "But what if I don't want it to be a date?" 𝐾𝐿 looked at her mother, upset. "Well, that's your own fault for saying it was a date in the first place. But try not to stress, I'm sure he's just as nervous as you are." Her mother smiled reassuringly. A small chuckle escaped 𝐾𝐿's lips as she relaxed a little. "Yeah, you're probably right." She stood up and made her way to the door, putting on her shoes. "I better get going, I don't want to be late for school." "All right, sweetie, be safe and have fun," her mother called as she walked back into the kitchen. As 𝐾𝐿 walked down the street with a jack plugged into her phone, the music played softly, providing a backdrop to her thoughts. She couldn't help but wonder why Midoriya had to be so mysterious. It was frustrating to feel left in the dark. Pulling out her phone, she scrolled through their messages, a small smile creeping onto her face as she fiddled with her other jack. The mystery was part of the allure, but she couldn't shake her thoughts about the picture he had sent the night before. He may not have had much muscle, but that scar was undeniably attractive. She wondered if he would let her touch it. Maybe she should send something playful to lighten the mood, especially since she had acted like they hadn't discussed going back to the store. She shook her head, reminding herself that he wasn't like that, and neither was she. Suddenly, she was jolted from her thoughts by a surprise attack from behind. "Hey 𝐤𝐼!" Tsubaki exclaimed, causing 𝐾𝐿 to drop her phone. "Why did you do that?" 𝐾𝐿 asked, startled. "My bad. I didn't mean to scare you," Tsubaki said with a small laugh as she reached for 𝐾𝐿's phone. "It's fine, I just wasn't expecting it," 𝐾𝐿 replied, taking a deep breath and searching for her phone. "Oh no, is the picture still open?" "Don't panic. If I jump to grab it, she'll know something's up." Thankfully, the phone was face down, hiding the screen. "Would you look at that? Lucky you, no cracks on the 𝐬𝐬." Tsubaki's voice shifted from cheerful to confused. Why were you looking at a picture of a guy in just a towel? She asked, raising an eyebrow. It's not like that, I swear. 𝐾𝐿 quickly snatched the phone away and exited out of the app. Oh my, Jai, you have a crush. I never would have guessed, Tsubaki teased. Hold on, he's not a crush, he's a friend who just got out of the hospital after an incident. I asked how he was healing, and he sent me that picture out of nowhere. And don't think I missed your comment about me not being able to land a guy, 𝐾𝐿 said, raising her jacks in playful defense. All right, whatever you say. Tsubaki laughed, turning to walk down the street. So, does this guy have anything to do with what we talked about the other day? And what if he does? 𝐾𝐿 replied, following behind her. It's nothing, just curiosity, Tsubaki said, a grin evident in her voice. So, do you like him? Maybe I do and maybe I don't. Does it really matter? 𝐾𝐿 plugged a jack back into her phone. Of course it does. Who doesn't love a little romance? Tsubaki exclaimed, throwing her hands up in excitement. 𝐾𝐿 scratched the back of her ear, contemplating her feelings as they continued down the street. She acknowledged the truth in his words. As she turned to face him, she began walking backward, urging him to share more. He described the guy, mentioning a scar on his chest, while he closed his eyes, focusing on his thoughts. She pressed for details, teasing him about the possibility of the guy being his secret crush. He took a moment to gather his thoughts before agreeing to share a little, insisting she forget about the picture she had seen. She smiled brightly at the deal. He revealed that the guy was their age, attended a different school, loved music, and aspired to be a hero. Beyond that, he remained a mystery to him. As he opened his eyes, he noticed a notification on his phone. Midoriya messaged him, asking if he still wanted to go to the park later. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 eagerly responded, expressing her excitement. A smile crept onto his face, but an unsettling feeling washed over him, hinting that something might go wrong. Tsubaki, curious and nosy, leaned in to read his messages, startling him. He reacted defensively, feeling a blush rise as he quickened his pace to escape her prying. She pressed for details about his plans with 𝐼𝐻𝐬, but he insisted it was none of her business and hurried into school, wishing he hadn't been caught. Once in class, he slumped over his bag, trying to avoid any further conversations, wondering how the guy was handling everything. In Izuku's perspective, he felt a wave of panic wash over him as he realized he had a date that day and no idea how to prepare. He sat in class, tapping his pen on his notebook, attempting to maintain a nonchalant facade. He questioned whether he needed conversation topics, dismissing the idea since they would be looking at guitars. He reminded himself that he could ask questions if silence fell between them. Flipping through his notes, he finally found a clue: Emerald Martin. Confused by his own cryptic note, he glanced at the clock and felt urgency to figure it out before the day ended. He considered asking 𝐼𝐻𝐬 for help, thinking she might know what he meant. During the last hour, he stared out the window, jotting down reminders for the upcoming week. When the bell rang, he waited a moment before packing up, relieved when no one stopped him on his way out. Pulling out his phone as he walked down the street, he saw 𝐼𝐻𝐬's message confirming their meeting at the guitar section. He felt a mix of excitement and anxiety, reminding himself to stay calm. He liked her, but uncertainty lingered about her feelings toward him. Taking a deep breath, he continued walking, trying to decipher what he meant by Emerald Martin. 15 minutes later, he stood outside the music store, removing his headphones and scanning for 𝐼𝐻𝐬. Something caught his eye, but he shook his head and entered the store. Shoni, who worked behind the counter, greeted him warmly. He offered a nervous smile, explaining that life had been hectic lately. Shoni encouraged him to ask for help if needed before returning to his seat. As he ventured deeper into the store, he heard the soft sound of an acoustic guitar. Approaching the guitar section, he stopped in awe as he spotted 𝐼𝐻𝐬, her violet hair partially obscuring her face as she played with her eyes closed. The gentle melody captivated him, and he thought how much he could enjoy listening to her. She playfully remarked that he should take a picture since it would last longer without even looking up. He sat on a nearby stool, surprised by her awareness of his presence. She explained that she recognized his footsteps and conversation with Shoni. He chuckled, recalling how she seemed to notice everything. He asked if she had been waiting long, to which she replied she had just arrived moments ago. Curious about her playing, he leaned in and asked if she had written the piece. She smirked, teasing him about whether she had or hadn't. He leaned back, amused by her playful nature, and she shifted the conversation, suggesting they find him a guitar. She returned the one she had been playing and inquired about his preferences, to which he nervously admitted he had no idea what he wanted. He found some notes he had written about what he was observing, but he was unsure of their meaning. He rubbed the back of his head in confusion. She looked at him, a hint of laughter escaping her lips as she questioned how he could forget the significance of his own notes. He explained that they were vague, merely stating Emerald Martin, and shrugged his shoulders in uncertainty. She sighed, clearly exasperated, and pointed out that a quick online search could have clarified everything for him. He lowered his head, feeling a wave of frustration wash over him as he acknowledged his mistake, calling himself an idiot. With a small laugh, she took his hand, reassuring him that she was just teasing. He stood up, grabbing his bag and following her deeper into the store until they reached a stop. She instructed him to take a seat while she searched through a wall of guitars. As he sat down, he felt the warmth of her hands still lingering on his. He closed and opened his hand a few times, lost in thought until she returned. She asked if he was all right, and he quickly nodded, placing his hand down. She revealed that she had found what he was looking for and handed him a Martin guitar. He expressed his gratitude and examined the instrument, curious about how she had guessed it was the one he meant. A smile appeared on her face as she sat beside him, explaining that based on his vague notes, there weren't many options. The brand was straightforward, but the term emerald was more ambiguous. Her grin widened as she seemed pleased with her deduction. He looked at her, puzzled, and she encouraged him to examine the guitar and share his thoughts. As he traced his fingers along the instrument, he stopped at the neck and smiled, realizing the obvious connection. She pointed out the emerald green fret markers, complimenting his taste despite his lack of experience. He thanked her again, feeling relieved that she had helped him figure it out. He began to practice a few chords, glancing at her to see her eyes closed, lost in the moment. She remarked on the unique sound of an acoustic guitar, noting how it could evoke various emotions depending on how it was played. A blush crept onto his face as he continued to play, focusing on his chord changes. She observed his struggle with the transitions and commented on the beauty of listening to someone learn. She described the excitement of a clean chord, the disappointment of a muted sound, and the challenges of developing calluses. He paused, intrigued by her insights, and she looked at him with a playful pout. He resumed strumming, eliciting a smile from her. She asked if he planned to purchase the guitar, leaning down to meet his gaze. He inquired about her opinion on how it sounded, and she replied that it sounded like him, broken and rough, yet yearning to be heard. She placed her hand on the neck of the guitar, muting the sound, and then touched his hand, emphasizing the potential hidden beneath the surface. He doubted her perception, looking down at the floor, but she gently lifted his chin, insisting she was attentive. He acknowledged her observation with a small smile, deciding to buy the guitar. Suddenly, Tsubaki appeared, causing 𝐼𝐻𝐼 to jump back in surprise. Tsubaki admitted she had followed him, curious about the person he was meeting. She crouched down beside him, reminding him of their shared past in elementary school. He felt overwhelmed, his hands trembling as he responded affirmatively to her question about their history. 𝐼𝐻𝐼 noticed his distress and reached out to him, concerned. Tsubaki taunted him about his stuttering, inching closer, which only heightened his anxiety. 𝐼𝐻𝐼 squatted in front of him, taking the guitar from his hands and urging him to respond. He apologized repeatedly, feeling 𝐼𝐻𝐼's arms on his shoulders as his heart raced. She reassured him that she was there for him, while Tsubaki noted that he would soon recover from this episode. As Tsubaki left, she commented on how cute they were together, leaving him feeling even more flustered. He continued to shake, sliding down to the ground, overwhelmed by the situation. She knelt beside him, sitting him up and wrapping her arms around him, gently stroking his hair. She reassured him, saying that everything would be all right. He expressed his remorse, feeling overwhelmed with guilt. She rocked back and forth, whispering that it wasn't his fault and that he had done nothing wrong. They remained in that embrace for several minutes, and gradually he began to calm down. His breathing steadied, and his heart rate returned to normal, though he still felt a bit breathless. He apologized again, his voice shaky and quiet. She comforted him, insisting that he had nothing to apologize for. Holding him tighter, he could feel her warm tears on him. He lamented about putting someone through a difficult experience, reflecting on how the day was supposed to be enjoyable. He placed a hand on her shoulder, expressing his regret for ruining the day. She firmly told him that he hadn't ruined anything. They sat in silence for a few more moments. He then asked if he could leave, glancing toward the door. She insisted that she wouldn't let him go alone, holding on to him as if he might vanish. He sighed softly, agreeing to go with her. She nodded against him, pulling away to wipe her tears. Standing up, she smiled and extended her hand to him. He took her hand and she helped him up. They retrieved the guitar from the ground and headed to the registers. After paying for it and a case, they stepped out onto the streets. Looking up, he noticed the clouds turning a deep gray, indicating rain was on the way. She took his hand, gazing down the street. He suggested she head home, knowing her parents would be worried. She didn't respond verbally but squeezed his hand tighter. He chuckled nervously, realizing she didn't mind staying. He then asked if she wanted to go somewhere else, stopping in his tracks. She took a step forward, pulling him along, and turned to face him with a small smile. They walked until they reached a corner, where he looked around, confused about her intentions. Without answering, she led him down the stairs and onto the sand. They crossed to the dock and sat under the gazebo, their legs dangling off the edge. She reminisced about how this beach had once been her favorite place, lamenting its current state of disarray. He observed the litter strewn across the shoreline and asked if that was why she started going to the park. She confirmed it, noting the park was closer, allowing her to enjoy it longer. She leaned back, expressing a longing to see the beach clean again, though she doubted it would happen soon. They sat in silence, listening to the soothing sound of the waves crashing against the shore. He took a deep breath and leaned over the edge slightly. She then brought up Tsubaki, asking what she meant about things happening almost every day. He felt a pang of discomfort and requested they not discuss it at that moment. She gazed into the distance as raindrops began to fall. Apologizing for prying, she expressed her longing to understand him better. He dismissed his worth, stating that he was not deserving of her time. Her concern deepened as she questioned why he felt that way. He insisted it was the truth, forcing a smile as he reflected on how he had caused her trouble since their first meeting. Suddenly, he felt a sharp sting on his cheek. She had slapped him. She firmly told him to stop speaking that way, challenging him about why she would still be there if he only caused trouble. She shook him gently, asking why she would spend time looking for him after school, rush to the hospital with him, or wait by the phone for his calls. Tears streamed down her face as he looked away, feeling a tightness in his chest. He suggested that she cared out of pity, believing she thought he needed protection. Her voice trembled with pain as she questioned if that was truly how he felt. He remained silent, unable to meet her gaze. She urged him to look at her, raising her voice slightly. When he finally did, he saw a whirlwind of emotions in her eyes: anger, sadness, pain, confusion, and betrayal. She called him an 𝐼𝐴, and he flinched at her words. She pulled him into her embrace, burying her face in his chest, expressing frustration at how he always put himself down and isolated himself from others. He felt lost, unsure of how to respond as she continued. She acknowledged that she couldn't fully understand his struggles but emphasized that he didn't have to face them alone. She reassured him that he had her support and urged him to let her in, pleading with him not to push her away. "I won't let you go through this alone anymore." The words left 𝐤𝐼𝐻𝐼's lips, and Izuku found himself speechless, his eyes wide with shock. 𝐤𝐼𝐻𝐼 continued, her gaze unwavering. She wrapped her jacks around his arms, as if to prevent him from retreating. She wasn't asking for all his secrets at once. She understood there were things he would rather not revisit. Her hand rested gently on his chest. She expressed her frustration over the past that shaped him, but also a strange gratitude that it had led her to him. Izuku was taken aback, struggling to comprehend the whirlwind of emotions swirling within him. They sat together in silence, the sound of rain enveloping them. After a moment, he mustered the courage to voice his fear. He admitted to being scared. 𝐤𝐬 acknowledged his feelings, her grip tightening around him. He slowly raised his arms to return her embrace, feeling her relax as she nestled her head against his chest. They were both uncertain about the future, but in that moment, being together was enough. Izuku rested his head on her shoulder, inhaling the calming scent of lavender that wafted from her hair. He promised her that one day he would share everything, and as their eyes met, he felt a connection deepen. 𝐤𝐬 smiled, her forehead touching his, and he felt a sense of warmth envelop them. In a moment of vulnerability, he thanked her, but the reaction he received startled him. He quickly apologized, fearing he had overstepped. 𝐤𝐬 reassured him, her cheeks slightly flushed, revealing that it was she who had kissed him. Confusion washed over him as he processed her words. They lay side by side, enjoying the comfort of each other's presence, but the rain began to intensify. 𝐤𝐬 suggested they head home before the weather worsened, but when Izuku asked if she wanted to leave, she shook her head. He chuckled, agreeing to stay a little longer. As they listened to the rain, Izuku's phone buzzed with a notification, pulling him from the moment. 𝐤𝐬 noticed his sudden change in demeanor and inquired about it, but he brushed it off. A playful jab from her Jax reminded him that she could see through his facade. He shared a story about a family friend who had questioned him about their day, and 𝐤𝐬 laughed, teasing him about his earlier response. He admitted that the day had started poorly but had turned wonderful with her company. As they prepared to part ways, Izuku grabbed his guitar, joking about not wanting to ruin the day. 𝐤𝐬 smiled, reminding him of the importance of practice. Just as she turned to leave, he called out to her, hesitating as he gathered his thoughts. Before he could finish his sentence, 𝐤𝐬 kissed him again, and this time he didn't pull away. When she finally broke the kiss, she blushed and asked if that was what he had wanted. Flustered, he stumbled over his words, revealing that he had actually wanted to ask if they could take a picture together. 𝐤𝐬's reaction was one of surprise and exasperation, but beneath it, there was a hint of amusement. Izuku felt a wave of relief mixed with embarrassment, realizing that their connection was growing stronger with each moment they shared. "What's wrong with you?" she asked, curiosity evident in her expression. He mumbled a response under his breath, feeling a mix of emotions. She raised an eyebrow and urged him to move on. "Come on, Izuku, let's get this over with." She walked to his side and pulled out her phone. "Now let's see that smile." Leaning into him for a moment, she snapped a picture. "I'll send it to you when I get home, okay? Is there anything else you want to ask?" As she started to walk away, he nervously rubbed the back of his head and mentioned his fondness for blackberries. She paused, glancing back at him with a hint of confusion. "Yeah, me too. They're really sweet." Her cheeks flushed as the implication of his words sank in. She turned away, her head lowered, and he noticed her fidgeting slightly. "Shut up, idiot. I'm going now. I'll see you around, Izuku." With that, she dashed off into the rain. He remained on the dock, sitting on a bench while pulling out his phone. He wondered what Mr. Izuku wanted. Mr. Izuku sent a message, reminding him to send his transcripts to help Nizu plan future lessons. Izuku quickly confirmed he would get them sent to UA directly. Putting his phone away, he grabbed his guitar and stepped into the rain. The walk home took only 15 minutes, but the downpour made it feel longer. Once back, he set his guitar in his room and headed for the shower. The warm water felt refreshing, washing away the day's roller coaster of emotions. The tranquility he felt around her was new and somewhat intimidating. He feared losing that sense of peace. After his shower, he returned to his room to find his phone buzzing. He threw on his black hoodie and picked it up, a small smile forming as he saw the photo she had sent. She commented that the picture turned out well, and he agreed. He saved the image and lay back on his bed, gazing at it. The faint taste of blackberries lingered on his lips, making him chuckle softly. His phone buzzed again, and he opened it, only to drop it in shock. She had sent a picture of herself sitting on her bed, her hair still damp and skin glistening, wearing a purple tank top and black shorts, a teasing smirk on her face. She mentioned that nothing beats a shower after walking in the rain, and he questioned why she would send such a picture. She replied that it was payback for the other night, leaving him in disbelief. He wondered what he had gotten himself into and requested that she not do that again. She reassured him that he didn't need to worry and asked if he had any plans for the next day. When he said he had none, she invited him over to bring his guitar for more lessons, which he gladly accepted. After getting up to start his computer, he began working on a new beat when his phone flashed again. He opened it, only to slam his head on the desk in frustration. His aunt had checked in to see how his day went, and he replied that it was fine, mentioning their trip to the music store and the beach. She joked about it being romantic, and he assured her that the rain hadn't ruined anything. Once the conversation ended, he bit the inside of his mouth, contemplating the picture of 𝐾𝐿 again. He sighed, knowing it would make her happy, and sent it to his aunt. Closing his computer, he grabbed a bottle of whiskey and returned to his bed. As he took a swig, his phone buzzed again. He opened it, already anticipating the chaos that awaited him. A small chuckle escaped him as he imagined her excitement, picturing her startling Uncle Masaru and Kanchan with her enthusiasm. Despite the earlier events at the music store, the day had turned out well. As he prepared to head to 𝐾𝐿's house, he checked to ensure he had everything. With his backpack on and guitar in hand, he recalled her message inviting him over whenever. Her parents were out for the day, and her mom had given permission. The walk would normally take nearly an hour, but the train made it a quick 15 minutes. Approaching her house, he marveled at its size, realizing he hadn't noticed it before. Taking a deep breath, he knocked on the door and waited. After a moment, she opened it, a smile on her face as she teased him about his timing. He apologized as he stepped inside, removing his shoes. She took his hand and led him upstairs, eager to start their lesson. As he looked around her room, he was speechless at the array of instruments. He asked how many she could play, and she casually mentioned that while she could play many, her favorites were guitar and bass. He admired her talent, feeling a mix of awe and admiration. A small blush appeared on her face as she tapped her jack together, expressing her gratitude. She quickly grabbed a guitar and settled back down on her bed, ready to begin. He nodded, picking up his guitar and sitting on a stool, wondering where they should start. She instructed him to begin with finger warm-ups, explaining that it would enhance his finger flexibility and make chord transitions easier. Although it could be confusing at first, she assured him that daily practice would yield significant benefits. She demonstrated the exercise, her fingers moving gracefully across the strings as if it were second nature to her. She advised him to take his time and focus on producing clean notes. He nodded in understanding, watching her fingers closely as he attempted to replicate her movements. His progress was slow, and his notes lacked clarity. When he glanced up, he noticed her observing his hands intently. He returned his focus to the guitar, continuing the exercise. After a minute, he reached the end and paused, letting out a sigh as he looked at her, eager for feedback. She continued to observe his hands before meeting his gaze, commenting that it wasn't too bad for his first attempt. However, she instructed him to repeat the exercise, starting from the 6th string. Confused, he questioned her seriousness, but her cold expression confirmed she was not joking. He gulped, returning his attention to the guitar's neck as he began the next part of the exercise. Once he finished, he stretched his fingers, feeling their stiffness. She remarked that if his fingers were already stiff, they had a lot of work ahead, as that was just the first set of warm-ups. Standing up, she leaned closer, a mischievous grin on her face, revealing that he still had 2 more sets to complete before moving on to the next exercise. He felt a sense of dread, wondering if she was torturing him. She encouraged him, reminding him of the time it took to get good at making beats. He mumbled that it took a couple of months. She tilted his head up, explaining that the same principle applied to instruments. The feeling of progress was addictive, and one day, what had once been challenging would become easy, fueling the longing to push further. Her smile was infectious, and he found himself smiling back, agreeing that it made sense. As he resumed the finger exercises, they gradually felt easier, and the notes sounded cleaner, which brought him joy. He managed to play a bit faster, though the notes became muffled again, prompting a small snicker from her. When he inquired about her amusement, she playfully pointed out that his tongue hung out a little when he concentrated too hard, causing him to look away, slightly embarrassed. After completing the exercise, he relaxed and let out a breath. She praised his efforts, stretching before telling him she would return shortly and instructed him to keep practicing his chord changes. He nodded, focusing intently on the guitar's neck. After a minute, he set the guitar down, taking a deep breath as he reached for his bag. He pulled out his flask, glancing at the door as he explained it was just something to take the edge off. Suddenly, the door swung open, and she stood in the doorway, questioning why the music had stopped. She noticed the flask in his hand, and he struggled to find the right words, simply stating it was his backpack. She raised an eyebrow, clarifying that she meant what he held. Stepping inside and closing the door behind her, she set a tray on her desk. He attempted to play it off, giving a shaky smile as he took another swig. She approached him, taking the flask from his hand and pointing a jack at his neck, demanding to know what was going on. He insisted it was nothing to worry about, trying to reclaim the flask from her grasp. The pressure of her jack against his throat made him sit back down on the stool, apologizing softly. She sighed, instructing him to put the guitar down, stating he wasn't leaving. Sitting on her bed, she caught a whiff of the alcohol, grimacing at the smell. She asked about the flask's purpose, and he admitted it helped him cope with stressful situations, avoiding her gaze. Curious, she inquired how long he had been using it. He admitted it had been a couple of years, lowering his head as she approached him. She squatted down to meet his eyes, tilting his head up with her jack. She reassured him that she wasn't angry about his choice, acknowledging that everyone had their ways of coping. She advised him to be smart about it, smiling as she returned the flask to his hand. With a nod, he agreed it was time to move on to the next exercise. After 2 hours of what felt like a grueling session, he found himself lying on her bed, staring at his hands, exhausted yet determined. All of his fingers had a pulse, and he wondered why she had made him do that. She reassured him that he would be fine while sitting on the stool, playing her guitar. He watched her, captivated by the way her eyes were closed, a strand of hair falling across her face, radiating peace. He asked when her next lesson would be, and she paused her playing, giving him a sharp look before smiling and resuming. He suggested meeting next Friday in the park. She confirmed their usual spot on the hill without breaking her focus on the music, promising to bring her guitar this time. They sat in silence for a while, the sound of her finger-picking filling the room. He then inquired about her plans for high school. She paused, looking up before continuing to play, stating that it was obvious she would join a music program since music had always been her passion. She suggested they could attend the same school, one that offered both production and technical courses, and smiled at him. He turned his gaze back to the ceiling, contemplating her suggestion. Although it sounded fun, he wasn't sure. She questioned why he hesitated, moving to sit at the edge of the bed. He admitted he hadn't made a decision yet, revealing that pursuing a hero course had been his dream, making it difficult to let go. She sighed and slid off the bed to sit on the floor, asking what it would take for someone to give up on a dream. He reflected that everyone was different. Some were too stubborn to give up, while others faltered at the first obstacle. He turned to face her as she rested her head on the bed, her fingers tapping nervously. He pondered what it would take for him to abandon his dreams, admitting he was stubborn and unwilling to accept that his dream might be unattainable. She turned to face him, resting her chin on the bed, and suggested that perhaps she would give up if she found a new dream. He raised an eyebrow, questioning if it was that easy to just find new dreams. She argued that it wasn't crazy to find new aspirations, especially if it involved people she cared about. She looked at him, a hint of a pout on her lips, and reminded him that one could have multiple dreams. He smiled slightly, acknowledging her point, but noted the time and mentioned he should probably leave soon. She hopped onto the bed beside him, confused about why he wanted to go when it wasn't late. He explained that she had invited him over to teach him guitar, and they had already accomplished that. She glared at him, playfully calling him an idiot. He admitted to being one, but she pulled him back to sit next to her, revealing that she had just wanted to hang out more, using the guitar lesson as an excuse. He looked at her, surprised by her honesty. She nervously unwrapped her jack from his arm, tapping them together, and he asked why she had to be so intense during the lesson. She admitted to getting a little carried away, explaining how much she loved music and how fun it was, while also noting that it was beneficial. He fell back onto the bed, covering his face with his hands, jokingly asking if she would torture him again on Friday. She laid back beside him, smiling and teasing that it depended on how well he did. He sighed, asking if he would get a reward for doing well. She inquired about what he wanted, and he mumbled something about blackberries before turning to face the ceiling. He felt a soft touch against his cheek and turned to find her onyx eyes looking back at him. She smiled gently before leaning in, their lips meeting briefly. Time seemed to slow as they shared a moment of bliss before she pulled away, resting her head on his shoulder. He smiled, asking what that was for, and she shrugged, saying he had earned it for the day. She nestled closer, humming happily, and confessed that she really liked him. He looked away, trying to hide a blush as he admitted he felt the same way. She tightened her jack around his arm, declaring that it meant he was her boyfriend now, and he accepted with a smile. They lay in comfortable silence for a few minutes until she asked when she would meet his parents. He tensed at the question, aware she noticed. Her jack coiled tighter around his arm, reassuring him that he wasn't alone. He looked away but could feel her gaze on him, and when she asked if everything was all right, he assured her it was nothing to worry about. He explained that his parents were busy, so he rarely saw them, trying to ease her concern. As he looked up at the ceiling and rolled his neck to stretch, she uncoiled her jack from his arm and sat up, staring at him intently. Just then his phone rang, interrupting the moment. Izuku pulled out his phone and glanced at the number before closing his eyes and then looking back at 𝐾𝐿. She sighed and nodded, giving him the go-ahead. He sat up and pressed the phone to his ear, greeting the caller. Izuku was met with a loud voice on the other end, demanding to know where he was after knocking on his door for 20 minutes. Surprised by the volume, he quickly pulled the phone away from his ear, glancing at 𝐾𝐿, who had also jumped at the sudden shout. He explained that he was at 𝐾𝐿's house, where she was giving him a guitar lesson. The voice on the line teased him, suggesting that it was a different kind of lesson. Izuku protested, but he quickly noticed 𝐾𝐿's startled reaction and silently apologized as she wrapped her headphones in a blanket to shield herself from any more outbursts. The caller continued, expressing that she wasn't ready to be a grandmother and that there was something important to discuss, though it would have been easier in person. Curiosity piqued, Izuku asked what had happened. The caller revealed that she had spoken to 𝐼𝐻 about him and his girlfriend. When she showed him a picture, they might have mentioned to Katsuki that Izuku had found a girlfriend before him. The response had been typical, with Katsuki merely grunting in disinterest. Feeling a wave of anxiety, Izuku abruptly hung up and stood, heading to his backpack to retrieve his flask. He shook it to gauge how much was left and downed the contents in one go. 𝐾𝐿, confused, asked if everything was all right, but he didn't respond, instead gathering his belongings. When she pressed him for answers, he hesitated, looking down and struggling to find the words. 𝐾𝐿's hands shook as she confronted him about his lack of trust, tears welling in her eyes. Feeling a lump in his throat, Izuku stepped closer to her, apologizing softly before walking past her and down the stairs. As he exited her house, he heard the faint sound of her sniffling, regretting his actions. The rest of the weekend passed in a blur, largely due to the excessive amount of alcohol he had consumed. The walk to school on Monday felt particularly long, each step sending waves of pain through his head. The school was busier than usual, and everything felt off. The only comfort came from the grades he received as he entered his classroom. Fortunately, Katsuki had not yet arrived, sparing him from the usual torment. He rested his head on his desk, gazing out the window and silently thanking his aunt. It wasn't long before Katsuki entered, and the atmosphere shifted dramatically. Izuku kept quiet, focusing on the outside world. He closed his eyes, bracing for the inevitable confrontation, but to his surprise, Katsuki ignored him entirely. A faint smile crept onto Izuku's face as he thought that perhaps the day wouldn't be so bad after all. The school day continued without incident, much to Izuku's relief. As the final bell rang, he packed his belongings and noticed a message from 𝐾𝐿, asking if everything was alright. He sighed, realizing he should probably tell her what had happened. Just as he was about to leave, a hand landed on his shoulder. 𝐒𝐮𝐻, a classmate, stood behind him with a few friends, teasingly mentioning that he had heard Izuku was on a date. Izuku stammered, trying to deny it while keeping his eyes fixed on his desk. 𝐒𝐮𝐻 continued, revealing that he had received a text from Tsubaki about Izuku's supposed date and pressed for details. Izuku insisted that 𝐾𝐿 was just a friend, but 𝐒𝐮𝐻 pulled out his phone, showing a picture of Izuku and 𝐾𝐿 at the music store, her hand on his face as they shared a moment. The image drew the attention of other classmates, and Izuku felt his anxiety rise as whispers filled the air. Some were surprised he could play guitar, while others found the situation cute. As the focus shifted to him, Izuku began to feel a mix of emotions. Maybe this wasn't as bad as he thought. Perhaps it could be a new beginning. However, 𝐒𝐮𝐻 leaned in closer, suggesting that if nothing was happening between Izuku and 𝐾𝐿, he might ask Tsubaki for her number instead, implying that she deserved someone better. The atmosphere shifted when the topic of her knowledge about his quirkless status arose. It felt as if the air had been 𝐒𝐮𝐻 out of the room, leaving him momentarily speechless. He simply nodded in response. Is that so? Well, how much did you have to pay her for the day? 𝐒𝐮𝐻's twisted smile revealed his intentions. He gestured behind him, and a few guys chuckled along with him. 𝐒𝐮𝐻's words ignited a fire within him. He glared at 𝐒𝐮𝐻, his resolve firm. He didn't care what was said about him, but he would not tolerate disrespect towards her. If 𝐒𝐮𝐻 ever spoke about her like that again, he would make him regret it. 𝐒𝐮𝐻, sensing the tension, turned to 𝗶𝗠𝐻, who was leaning against the wall. Hey 𝗶𝗠𝐻, did you hear what Midoriya just said? 𝗶𝗠𝐻's gaze shifted from Midoriya to 𝐒𝐮𝐻. Yeah, what about it? Why are you dragging me into your mess? Are you scared of Deku? The class began to murmur, and 𝐒𝐮𝐻's defensiveness was palpable. Like I'm scared of him. I just wondered what you thought about someone like him getting a girl before you did. 𝐒𝐮𝐻 smirked, attempting to provoke. 𝗶𝗠𝐻's temper flared, small explosions crackling in his hands. He towered over 𝐒𝐮𝐻, his voice low and threatening. What did you just say? Listen up, I don't care if Deku has a girlfriend or not. If he does, good for him. At least he has something going for him. You should be embarrassed he got one before you. Last I checked, every girl you asked out turned you down. With that, 𝗶𝗠𝐻 stormed out of the classroom, a smirk on his face as he raised his hand in a casual farewell. Feeling a surge of confidence, he stood up and left the classroom, aware of the eyes on him. Before leaving campus, he stopped by the advising office to request a copy of his transcripts to be sent to UA. The conversation ended with the advisor lecturing him about setting attainable goals, only to be left speechless when he provided the priority sender access code. The school halls were now empty, save for a few students involved in club activities. As he approached the front gate, he pulled out his flask and took a sip, only to spit it out when he felt a hand on his shoulder. Hey Midoriya. He turned to see three classmates leaning against the wall. Yukihira, Sasaki, Yusa, what can I do for you? They stared at him for a moment before Yukihira broke the silence. Sorry, did we interrupt something? She gestured toward the flask. He sighed, taking another sip. The surprise on their faces was evident. What? There's no need to pretend it's nothing, especially with a nose like yours, Yukihira. She smiled as he put the flask away. True, it's handy for the restaurant. But it can be a hassle when both my parents are working. It's especially tough during gym class. She chuckled softly. Confusion washed over him. They had never been part of the group that tormented him, but this was the first time they acknowledged him beyond the occasional glance. I'm sorry, but I should get going. I have some things to take care of. He turned to leave, pulling out his headphones. Midoriya, wait. He paused and turned back. Yes. He noticed her hands trembling slightly, a hint of nervousness in her demeanor. That girl you're with. She's really lucky to have someone like you. Her golden eyes met his with determination. You stood up to those who put you down for saying terrible things about her. Any girl would be lucky to have someone like you. It was really cool. A blush crept across his face, and she quickly looked away, her own cheeks flushed. It's not just me, we all think. She motioned to the others, who nodded in agreement. He ran a hand through his hair, offering them a smile. "Thanks." The three of them returned his smile. "Also, I have a question. What's up?" He began to relax around them. "Can you really play guitar?" She looked down, a hint of shyness in her voice. "Sort of. I'm still learning. I'm better at making beats." He adjusted his bag on his shoulder. A small smile appeared on her face. "If it's not too much to ask, I'd like to hear it sometime." He hesitated, overwhelmed by the unexpected turn of the conversation. Before he could respond, Sasaki gently turned Yukihira away. "Sorry about her, but just think about it, alright?" She smiled warmly. "And we won't tell anyone about your little secret. See you around, Midoriya." With that, the three of them walked down the street. As he made his way back to his apartment, he reflected on the day's events. Is today opposite day or something? Nothing is making sense. First, I stood up to a bully and they backed down. Then a few classmates acknowledged me and said I did something cool. I didn't realize being a decent human being was considered cool, but apparently it is. And to top it all off, Bakugo more or less stood up for me. He navigated through side streets, his confidence soaring. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation as Izuku Midoriya found himself pondering what might happen next. Suddenly, a familiar voice echoed through the alleyway, causing him to freeze in place. All Might, the towering symbol of peace, stood just a few feet away, radiating an aura of strength and kindness. Izuku felt a surge of joy at the sight of his hero. All Might explained that he had been pursuing a petty thief through the intricate sewer systems of the city, pulling out a bottle filled with green sludge as he spoke. Izuku couldn't help but share a laugh with him, momentarily feeling like the enthusiastic child he once was, captivated by the world of heroes. However, that joy quickly faded as he looked down at the ground, a weight settling in his chest. He hesitated before asking All Might a question that had been haunting him. With a clenched fist, he inquired whether someone like him, quirkless, could ever become a hero. All Might's expression shifted as he considered the question, and he asked for Izuku's name. When Izuku introduced himself, All Might's demeanor turned serious. He explained that the hero world could be unforgiving, a place where many heroes didn't realize how fortunate they were. He shared his own experiences, hinting at the chaos he faced in his youth. Ultimately, he delivered the crushing truth. He didn't believe someone quirkless could become a hero like him. With a gentle hand on Izuku's head, he expressed his sorrow for the young boy's predicament. In that moment, Izuku felt as if he were 5 years old again, his dreams of heroism shattered. He had anticipated this response, yet it still stung deeply. With a heavy heart, he removed All Might's hand from his head and apologized for interrupting him. Turning away, he began to walk back toward his apartment. As he made his way home, he heard All Might call out, but the hero was interrupted by a coughing fit. Izuku turned back, noticing a hint of BLD at the corner of All Might's mouth. Overwhelmed with gratitude, he thanked All Might for everything he had done for others, tears streaming down his face as he ran away. Once inside his apartment, Izuku tossed his bag aside and rushed to his room, frustration boiling over. He slammed the door and collapsed onto his bed, burying his face in the pillows. He questioned why he couldn't let things be and why he had asked such a painful question. Rolling onto his side, he spotted an old poster of All Might on the wall. In a fit of rage, he punched the wall, feeling a mix of pain and relief as he pulled his hand back, dust and a trickle of BLD marking his skin. He pressed his hand against the poster, smearing it across All Might's name. Determined to rid himself of the past, he gathered his old hero journals and threw them out the window, shattering the glass. As he searched for a hidden notebook, a smile broke through his tears at the memories it contained. An idea sparked in his mind as he gazed at the broken window. He tossed the last notebook onto his bedside table and reached for a shard of glass, contemplating his next move. But as he looked at the notebook one last time, he sighed and discarded the glass piece out the window. He felt trapped in a 𝐒𝐮𝐬 of despair, too afraid to confront reality. After tending to his hand, he cleaned up the glass shards and covered the broken window with a sheet for protection. Seeking solace, he grabbed his pillow, blanket, and charger, opting to sleep on the couch instead of his room. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts until he landed on someone significant. He sent a message to Mr. Izuku, expressing his longing to attend UA. Mr. Izuku responded with caution, warning him of the challenges ahead. Izuku reassured him that he was ready to face whatever came next, eager to start his journey as a hero. As he plugged in his phone and closed his eyes, he felt a mix of determination and heartache. He knew there was no turning back now. A new chapter was about to begin. Izuku felt a wave of guilt wash over him as he faced Aunt Mitsuki and Uncle Masaru, who were visibly shocked by his decision. He tried to maintain his composure as he met their eyes, acknowledging the weight of his choice. Aunt Mitsuki sighed, expressing her support while asking when he would be leaving. Izuku shifted his gaze, revealing that it would be Saturday. The room fell silent for a moment before Uncle Masaru excused himself to the kitchen. He returned with 2 glasses and a bottle of whiskey, pouring drinks for both himself and Aunt Mitsuki. As they sipped their drinks, Uncle Masaru's concern grew. He asked Izuku if he had everything he needed, emphasizing the importance of preparing for his departure. Aunt Mitsuki's anxiety began to surface, her hands trembling as she spoke. Uncle Masaru placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, urging her to calm down. He understood the difficulty of the situation but reminded her that their support was crucial for Izuku. Aunt Mitsuki, overwhelmed with emotion, expressed her distress at the thought of one of her children moving away so soon. Tears streamed down her face as she questioned how Izuku could expect them to cope with such news. Uncle Masaru's expression turned serious as he acknowledged his own struggles with the situation. He wiped away some of Aunt Mitsuki's tears and turned back to Izuku, asking how they could help make this transition easier for him. Izuku swallowed hard, realizing the emotional toll this decision was taking on his family. He took a deep breath and revealed that it would be best if they forgot about him, as he intended to start anew, leaving behind the old Izuku Midoriya. Aunt Mitsuki reacted strongly, insisting that they would never abandon him. Uncle Masaru intervened, encouraging Izuku to explain further. With a nod, Izuku continued, expressing that he believed it would be easier for everyone if they simply moved on. He felt that no one would question his absence, assuming he had chosen to end things due to being quirkless, a reality that weighed heavily on their minds. Aunt Mitsuki's grip on the couch tightened as she considered the impact on Izuku's friends, particularly Katsuki. Izuku admitted that he didn't think it would affect Katsuki much, revealing the scar he bore as a reminder of their past. Uncle Masaru's shock was palpable, while Aunt Mitsuki turned away, grappling with the painful truth. As the tension in the room escalated, Uncle Masaru's anger boiled over, and he declared his intention to confront Katsuki. However, Aunt Mitsuki stopped him, urging him to think before acting. Izuku reflected on his past with Katsuki, acknowledging the kindness he had received recently and asking them not to be too hard on him. Aunt Mitsuki then inquired about Izuku's girlfriend, to which he responded that she was unhappy but understood his decision. He felt a mix of anxiety and uncertainty about their future together. Realizing it was time to start packing, Izuku prepared to leave, but Uncle Masaru reassured him that they would help with the process, promising to visit the apartment on Saturday. Meanwhile, 𝐤𝐼 had not heard from Izuku in 3 days, and concern gnawed at her. She replayed their last conversation in her mind, questioning whether she had pushed him away. As she sat at her desk, lost in thought, Tsubaki approached her, noticing her distress. 𝐤𝐼 glanced at her friend, still preoccupied with her worries about Izuku. It wasn't the reminder that bothered her, but she appreciated it nonetheless. Their eyes locked, and she felt a surge of determination. She needed to know what had happened on Friday. Tsubaki casually mentioned that the panic attack was nothing serious, something that had occurred frequently in the past. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through it as if searching for something to distract her. Curiosity got the better of her, and she asked how often it had happened. Tsubaki explained that it occurred a few times a week, sometimes more, especially in stressful situations. She glanced away from her phone, her expression thoughtful. When asked about her relationship with him, Tsubaki hesitated. She admitted it wasn't particularly good or bad, he was just someone who existed in her life. Most people teased him for being quirkless, But she had chosen to stay out of it, laughing along but never instigating anything. The question of why she had started something on Friday lingered in the air. Tsubaki shrugged, attributing it to old habits. She continued scrolling, seemingly unfazed. The inquiry about their relationship status hung heavy. Tsubaki's uncertainty was palpable. She hadn't spoken to him since Saturday, following a disagreement that left her feeling unsettled. She recounted their last hangout, where he had received a call and abruptly left after assuring her everything was fine. When she confronted him about his honesty, he had apologized and walked away. The memory stung, and she felt her heart ache as she looked at a photo from the beach. Tsubaki offered insight into his character, suggesting he was not one to share his feelings easily. He likely blamed himself for the situation and assumed she was upset with him. She casually mentioned that if things didn't work out, she knew some guys who were interested in her. Skeptical, she questioned how Tsubaki knew about these potential suitors. Tsubaki explained that she had sent a picture of them together to an old friend who had found her cute. The offer to share her number was met with a firm warning, and Tsubaki quickly backed down. Their conversation shifted back to the topic of Izuku. 𝐤𝐬 expressed frustration over Tsubaki's judgment, urging her to get to know him better. She felt a mix of emotions, knowing that understanding him was essential. As class began, 𝐤𝐬 rested her head in her hand, wishing for Izuku's well-being. The days dragged on, each one feeling longer than the last. 6 days had passed without a word from him, and she found herself waiting at their usual spot in the park, guitar in hand, hoping for his arrival. She reassured herself that he was just late, but doubt crept in as she wiped away tears while gazing at the clouds. The sound of crunching leaves made her heart flutter, but her excitement faded when she turned to see her mother approaching. Her mother urged her to come home, expressing concern after hours of waiting. 𝐤𝐬 protested, fearing Izuku would think she had forgotten him. Her mother wrapped her arm around her, gently suggesting it was time to leave. Defeated, 𝐤𝐬 stood, wiping away her tears as she descended the hill. She vowed that Izuku better have a good explanation for his absence when they next met. The following morning, she stared at their beach photo, reminiscing about their happiness. It was hard to believe how quickly things had changed. Frustrated, she slammed her head on her desk, realizing she had overlooked something important. She reached out to Tsubaki, asking for a favor regarding Izuku. Tsubaki confirmed she knew people who attended the same school as him and agreed to inquire about his well-being. 𝐤𝐬 sighed, hoping this would ease her worries. If necessary, she could ask her father for a ride to Izuku's house to get answers. Tsubaki's response came quickly, revealing that Izuku hadn't been in class since Monday. The weight of that news settled heavily on 𝐤𝐬, and she felt time slow as she processed the implications. She swallowed the lump in her throat and began to prepare herself. 𝐤𝐬 expressed her gratitude to Tsubaki, who asked if she was all right. 𝐤𝐬 responded uncertainly, indicating she would talk later. She made her way downstairs to find her parents in the living room. She requested her father to take her to Izuku's house, which surprised him, while her mother smiled at the suddenness of the request. Her father questioned her about the urgency, and 𝐤𝐬 explained that she had a bad feeling, gripping the hem of her shirt as she pleaded for their help. Before her father could respond, her mother placed a hand on his shoulder, expressing her longing to confront Izuku about the previous day. A small smile appeared on 𝐤𝐬's face at her mother's support. A few minutes later, they were on the road to Izuku's house, the drive quiet except for the music playing in the background. An unsettling feeling lingered in the air, and 𝐤𝐬 noticed her parents seemed a bit tense. She asked if there was something they weren't telling her, prompting a moment of silence before her mother sighed softly, advising her to keep an open mind upon arrival. Confused, 𝐤𝐬 inquired if her mother had been to Izuku's house before, thinking only her father had visited. Her father clarified that they had stopped by once to check on him, but he wasn't home. 𝐤𝐬 gazed out the window as the surroundings changed, her heart sinking as she began to understand the implications of their words. Soon, they arrived at a rundown apartment complex. As they parked, her father took a deep breath and informed her that Izuku lived on the 4th floor, the last door on the right. Nodding, 𝐤𝐬 hurried to the stairs, her spirits lifting slightly at the sight of a few people approaching the door. Despite the effort it took to ascend 4 flights, Her determination propelled her forward. She reached the door and hesitated, urging herself to knock. Taking a deep breath, she knocked and waited, feeling as if time had stopped. Her heart raced until the door opened, revealing a man of average height with glasses and brown hair, who looked at her with confusion. She apologized for the intrusion and asked for Izuku Midoriya, her hands trembling as she realized the man bore no resemblance to him. The man expressed surprise at her inquiry, and just then, a voice from inside the apartment called out, recognizing her voice. A woman with blonde hair, appearing to be around the same age, approached and stood behind the man, her red eyes hinting at recent tears. She remarked that 𝐤𝐬 looked familiar. 𝐤𝐬 introduced herself as Izuku's girlfriend, explaining her concern after not hearing from him all week. She hoped they could provide answers or direct her to him, but instead, their expressions shifted to shock and horror. The woman slowly sank to the ground against the wall, crying once more. The man looked between her and 𝐤𝐬, suggesting it would be easier to explain inside. He helped the woman up and motioned for 𝐤𝐬 and her parents to enter. As they walked through the hallway, a sense of unease settled over 𝐤𝐬. The apartment felt empty, with few pictures on the walls, many of which were turned over. Peering into an open room, her heart sank further. She stood in the doorway of what she assumed was Izuku's room. The bed was unmade, a sheet covered the window, the dresser mirror was broken, and there was a hole in the wall near the closet. His guitar leaned against the wall, and an olive green jacket hung over a chair. Approaching the desk, she picked up the jacket and noticed two envelopes, one addressed to her and the other to someone named 𝐾𝐿. Turning back to the door, she saw the shocked expressions on everyone's faces as she revealed the letter with her name. It slowly dawned on her what this meant. She struggled to comprehend the reality of the situation, tears streaming down her face as she looked at the floor, where traces of dried blood marked the ground. Falling to her knees, she clutched the jacket tightly, pleading for someone to tell her it wasn't real. No one responded, they all looked away, heads bowed. In disbelief, she insisted it was just a cruel joke, convinced that Izuku was fine and would reveal himself later. With a trembling hand, she opened the letter, hoping for a message that would dispel her fears. Instead, the words she read shattered her world. "I'm sorry. Goodbye." Those 3 words sent her spiraling into despair. Overwhelmed, she could only cry into his jacket, losing all sense of time as everything around her faded into a blur. At some point, it became clear that the two of them were family friends who were looking after Izuku because his parents were unavailable. They never explained why, but it felt like something serious had happened. They also informed my dad that we could keep the guitar Izuku had left behind. Since neither of them played, it would be put to better use with us. Although it was a kind gesture, I didn't want it. As we drove home, I gazed out the window, still holding onto his jacket. I wasn't sure if they had allowed me to take it or if I had simply taken it without permission. Regardless, it was the only source of comfort I had, even if it was minimal. It served as a reminder that I was still here and that I had a piece of him with me. I was uncertain about how I would cope with this tomorrow, next month, or even next year. I didn't know if I would ever return to my old self, but one thing was clear: I wanted to be a hero. I buried my face in his jacket and closed my eyes, vowing to prevent anyone else from experiencing what he had endured. From Bakugo's perspective, he was lounging on the couch, flipping through channels when he heard his parents come in. They entered the living room, and he sensed something was off. His mother spoke, her tone serious. She mentioned that they needed to discuss something important. Bakugo turned to face them, puzzled by the letter they were holding. When they revealed it was from Izuku, he felt a wave of confusion wash over him. He picked up the letter, noticing the nickname Izuku had called him since childhood. He questioned whether Izuku had run off with the girl he was dating, dismissing the idea with a laugh. He wondered how long it would be until Izuku returned. However, his mother's trembling voice shattered his amusement. She revealed that Izuku wasn't coming back, and Bakugo's heart sank. He raised an eyebrow, trying to make sense of it. He joked about Izuku moving in with someone else, but the lack of laughter from his parents made him uneasy. Something was clearly wrong. When his mother began to cry, his father comforted her and turned to Bakugo, explaining that Izuku hadn't run away or moved out. They had always considered him a second son, and the thought of him being gone was distressing. Bakugo opened the letter, his heart racing as he read Izuku's words. The message was clear, it wasn't his fault, and he appreciated Bakugo's support. Frustrated, he stood up and made his way to his room, trying to block out the sound of his mother's tears. He placed the note on his desk and sat against the wall on the floor, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. Why did Izuku have to say that? Izuku stepped into his new home, greeted by Mr. Aizawa, who carried a bag inside. The space was modest but functional, with a living room that featured 2 couches, a glass coffee table, and a television. The kitchen was seamlessly connected, showcasing a marble island. The open concept made it difficult to distinguish where one room ended and another began. Izuku commented on the high-end appearance of the house, noting its cleanliness and organization, which contrasted with Mr. Aizawa's unassuming demeanor. Mr. Aizawa instructed Izuku to set down his bags and follow him for a tour. As they walked, Izuku observed the meticulous arrangement of each room, each serving a distinct purpose. A scratching post caught his attention, prompting him to ask about it. Mr. Aizawa explained that it was for his cat, 𝐿𝐼𝐻, who was shy around newcomers but would warm up over time. Continuing down the hall, Mr. Aizawa revealed Izuku's room, which left him astonished. It was fully furnished with a larger bed than he was used to, a desk equipped with 2 monitors, and a walk-in closet that already contained some clothes. Curiosity about the clothes led him to notice an envelope addressed to him, which Mr. Aizawa explained contained supplies for training. Mr. Aizawa assured Izuku that he had his own bathroom and shower, allowing for privacy. After a brief pause to let Izuku take in the room, Mr. Aizawa guided him back to the living room, where he opened a set of double doors leading to a training area. The room was equipped with a punching bag, weights, and padded flooring. Izuku inquired about the time they would spend there, to which Mr. Aizawa responded with a smirk, cautioning him to stay safe. As they returned to the living room, Mr. Aizawa laid out the house rules. He emphasized the importance of privacy and independence while also mentioning that Izuku would need to clean up after himself in the kitchen. He encouraged Izuku to communicate any specific needs regarding food and reminded him to help maintain the cleanliness of the house. Curfew was relaxed, but Mr. Aizawa advised keeping noise levels down for the sake of tranquility, especially for 𝐿𝐼𝐻. Izuku agreed to the rules and headed to his new room, feeling the strangeness of being in a different environment. He unpacked his belongings, which included clothes, a recently purchased bottle of whiskey, his laptop, and a few personal items. He placed an old childhood photo on a desk shelf and contemplated where to hide the whiskey bottle, ultimately deciding to conceal it behind his bags in the closet. As he surveyed the room, he realized he had forgotten his favorite jacket. He found a black hoodie to wear. Instead, acknowledging that while it wasn't the same, it would suffice. Sitting at the desk, he glanced around again, wishing he had brought his guitar, which he could almost envision in an empty corner, waiting to be played. I left my past behind and knew I couldn't return. Picking up the envelope, I opened it with a shrug. The letter read, "Mr. Midoriya, I am thrilled that you decided to pursue the hero course. I understand that Mr. Aizawa will keep you busy with training, but we must ensure your mind remains engaged. I will visit on Monday afternoon to discuss lesson plans and how we can best support your education. One of our teachers will accompany me, and I believe they will be instrumental in your progress. Until then, best of luck. Sincerely, Principal Nizu." Setting the letter aside, I began arranging my workstation, letting out a sigh. I wondered why I felt that his lessons would be even more challenging than the training sessions. Shaking off the thought, I focused on fixing the EQ of the latest beat I had been working on. Perhaps it was an off day or the new environment, but nothing I created sounded right. I removed my headphones and leaned back in my chair, contemplating my next move. Getting lost in thoughts could dull one's senses, I realized. Suddenly, Mr. Aizawa appeared in the doorway, informing me that dinner was almost ready and asking if I could lend a hand. I agreed, glancing at the clock and realizing it was nearly 6. I followed him into the kitchen, curious about what he needed help with. He asked me to set the table, pointing to a cabinet filled with dishes. Just as I began, a series of knocks echoed from the door. I looked at Mr. Aizawa, puzzled, but he instructed me to ignore it, assuring me they would leave soon. However, the knocks grew more insistent, sounding almost like someone trying to force their way in. A voice called out, demanding to know why Mr. Izuku had cancelled their date. I glanced at him, surprised to learn he had a date that evening. He admitted he had told her something had come up, and I could see the concern in his eyes as he anticipated her arrival. I couldn't help but wonder why he hadn't explained the situation to her. Mr. Izuku sighed, preparing to answer the door. When he opened it, a woman with dark green eyes and seafoam green hair stood there, visibly upset. She immediately questioned him about the cancellation, but her expression shifted to confusion when she noticed me in the kitchen. She asked why there was a child in his house, and Mr. Izuku stepped aside, inviting her in. He introduced me as Izuku Midoriya, explaining that he had taken me in, while she introduced herself as 𝐒𝐮𝐬, his girlfriend. I greeted her shyly, bowing before reaching for the plates. Emi teased me about my nervousness, assuring me she wouldn't bite. Mr. Izuku shot her a glare, but she laughed, finding humor in the situation. Emi then inquired about how I ended up living with Mr. Izuku. I hesitated, struggling to find the words, but he interjected, stating that I wanted to be a hero, which prompted him to take me in. Emi seemed surprised but curious, and I felt a mix of emotions as I listened to their exchange. She expressed her hope that there would be enough food for her, but Mr. Izuku admitted he hadn't prepared extra. Emi burst into laughter, finding his honesty amusing. After a moment, I asked her about the name licorice, curious if she had chosen it. She confirmed it was her idea, insisting it suited the pet perfectly. I felt a shiver at the mention of the name, unsure of what to say. Emi suddenly realized I had just arrived that afternoon and apologized for not knowing. She started to leave, but Mr. Izuku reassured her that it was fine and that she could stay if I didn't mind. I took a deep breath, not wanting to intrude on their time together, and assured her I was okay with her staying. She hugged me, calling me considerate and joking about how I must be a heartthrob. I tensed at the sudden contact and the implications of her words, lowering my head and quietly admitting that she didn't know the half of it. Emi looked at me, confused, and Mr. Izuku intervened, asking her to stop teasing. He had only known her for a few minutes, so he felt uncertain about her boldness. He turned and leaned against the counter. She quickly released her hold on him and pouted, playfully suggesting that any man would want to be embraced by someone as charming as herself. She batted her eyes at him, but he replied that anyone wanting to keep their sanity would think otherwise. He returned to the stove, muttering under his breath that dinner was ready. As they ate, the conversations began to dwindle. He remained quiet unless someone directed a question at him, unsure of how to fit into the group dynamic. Everything seemed to be going smoothly until she turned to him with a smile, asking about his aspirations to become a hero and his impressive quirk. He struggled to find his words, feeling a wave of anxiety wash over him. Thoughts raced through his mind, worrying about how she might perceive Mr. Izuku's decision to train someone without a quirk. He didn't want to cause any problems on his first day. His breathing quickened, and his vision began to blur. Just as panic threatened to overwhelm him, he felt a comforting embrace. The familiar scent of mint helped him regain his composure. She gently reassured him, encouraging him to take slow, calming breaths while rubbing his back in soothing circles. As his vision cleared, he focused on the green around him and the minty aroma, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. A tear escaped his eye, reminding him of childhood dreams of having a powerful quirk and playing hero with his mother, who always smelled like mint. He wrapped his arms around her, whispering a plea for her not to leave. She tightened her hold, assuring him that she wasn't going anywhere. Once he had calmed down, she returned to her seat, concern still etched on her face. The room fell silent until Mr. Izuku placed 2 glasses on the table and poured a drink into each. He handed one to her and took the other for himself, suggesting she might need it by the end of the evening. She nodded and took the glass in her hand. The next hour was spent sharing his story with her. He spoke about his quirk, his home life, and everything that led to Mr. Izuku taking him in, omitting details that seemed unnecessary. After he finished, they sat in silence as she contemplated her empty glass. She remarked on the challenging hand he had been dealt, resting her elbows on the table. He could only agree, keeping his gaze fixed on the table. Mr. Izuku then mentioned he had a favor to ask, looking between the two of them. She met his gaze before turning back to him, laughing softly and agreeing to help, stating that heroes were meant to assist others. Confused, he raised his head and asked if she was a hero too. She confirmed that she was indeed Ms. Joke and settled back in her chair, looking to Mr. Izuku for confirmation of her involvement. He sighed, acknowledging her busy schedule but expressing gratitude for any assistance she could provide. She insisted on helping, a smirk appearing on her face as she teased about being called Mom. He felt embarrassed, apologizing for the slip, but she playfully declared that the line had already been crossed and that he could at least call her Ms. Emmy. He nodded in agreement, and she suggested they exchange numbers. He hesitated, shifting his gaze to his lap and explaining that he didn't have a phone. She was surprised, reminding him that he had one just that morning. He awkwardly admitted he had gotten rid of it, prompting Mr. Izuku to question his reasoning. He explained that he didn't want his aunt to continue paying the bill after he left. Mr. Izuku understood and offered to help him get a new phone the following day, assuring him that he would cover the service fee. Ms. Emmy chimed in, offering to take him since she had the day off and thought it would be fun to get to know him better. He expressed his gratitude, trying to muster a smile. As she stood up to leave, she thanked Mr. Izuku for dinner and bid him farewell, giving him a hug and a kiss on the cheek before exiting. Once the door closed, he let out a deep breath and began clearing the leftover dishes. Mr. Izuku joined him in the kitchen, agreeing that Ms. Emmy was nice but noted that she sometimes struggled with boundaries. He acknowledged her good intentions as he began putting the leftovers in the fridge. The next day promised to be intriguing, that much was certain. He chuckled softly, advising not to get overwhelmed. The response was a simple acknowledgement as the dishes were finished, and the journey back to the room began. The computer screen still displayed the unfinished song, and settling into the chair, a sigh escaped as headphones were placed on. The hope was to finally figure it out this time. Time slipped away, but the mix still felt incomplete, lacking depth. Resting his head on the desk, he glanced at the clock, contemplating better luck tomorrow. After shutting down the computer, a quick visit to the closet resulted in a sip of whiskey before climbing into bed. A small smile appeared as the face was buried in the pillow, wondering if the man had indeed bought clouds. Morning arrived, bringing with it a sense of well-being. Stretching revealed a weight on the chest, and upon opening his eyes, bright yellow ones stared back in surprise. Blinking in confusion, he mused that this must be licorice, or perhaps he was still dreaming. The black cat meowed, maintaining its gaze. The realization dawned that the man had mentioned licorice would stay close once accustomed to him, though this was unexpected. Another meow resonated as the cat shook the bell around its neck. Reaching out to pet him resulted in licorice jumping off and darting out of the room, the bell jingling with each step. Curiosity arose about how he had not heard the bell the previous day. After getting out of bed, the kitchen beckoned. A note on the counter caught his attention, accompanied by a key. The message indicated errands were on the agenda, with breakfast waiting in the fridge and a reminder to clean up afterward. The spare house key was also included, with a plea to keep it away from Emmy. Opening the fridge revealed a plate of wrapped food. After heating it up, he glanced around the living room, wondering where the cat had gone. Once the food was ready, it was placed on the counter, and the first bite confirmed the man's culinary skills. As he continued to eat, a familiar pair of yellow eyes reappeared, prompting a chuckle. He acknowledged Licorice's presence, assuring the cat of his good intentions. The cat remained still but gradually approached, raising an eyebrow at the silent movement. The absence of the bell was puzzling, and a chuckle escaped as Licorice drew nearer. Eventually, Licorice leaped onto the counter, eyeing him once more. A small piece of food was offered, and the cat sniffed it before replacing the bell with the food. Confusion washed over him as he whispered about the stealthy cat. Licorice meowed again, hopping off the counter and rubbing against his leg, prompting a playful remark about the cat's newfound affection after being fed. The bell jingled as Licorice returned to the living room, and a smirk formed at the cleverness of the little creature. After finishing the meal and cleaning up, he returned to his room. Post-shower and change of clothes, he found himself back at the desk, stuck in the same spot as the previous night. The plan was to work until 𝐒𝐮𝐬 arrived, but a knock at the front door interrupted this. Sighing, he made his way to answer it, surprised to find 𝐒𝐮𝐬 standing there, earlier than expected. A hesitant greeting was exchanged. She greeted him with enthusiasm, ready to embark on their day together. He was taken aback by the early hour, realizing it was still before noon. Her laughter filled the air as she mentioned they had a long day ahead. Confusion settled in as he thought they were only going to get him a phone. A smirk crossed her face as she revealed plans for a full day together. A lump formed in his throat as he locked the door and followed her, a sense of unease creeping in. The car ride was marked by silence, both unsure of how to interact after the previous night's events. Sensing her discomfort, he broke the ice by mentioning licorice. Her surprise at his initiation of conversation was evident, and she responded positively, acknowledging the cat's cuteness. He shared the amusing encounter of waking up with licorice sleeping on him, which elicited a chuckle from her. As he described the cat's sneaky behavior, she raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Their conversation flowed more easily, and laughter broke the tension as she found humor in the cat's antics. As they drove around, small talk continued, and gradually his stutter began to fade. Comfort grew, but questions lingered in his mind, particularly about how she had the information to add him to Mr. Izuku's account and the peculiar gas mask with smiling faces on the filters that sat in her car. Shaking the earlier question from her mind, they finished getting a new phone for her. Back in the car, she completed the setup. As they drove around, she suggested stopping for lunch, mentioning a good place nearby. She tucked her phone into her pocket and watched the buildings pass by as they continued through town, eventually stopping at a small establishment. She reassured him that, despite its appearance, the food was excellent, and she was good friends with the owner. With a smile, they exited the car and headed for the door. Upon entering, a man greeted them warmly, recognizing her immediately and asking if she wanted her usual spot. She nodded, laughing lightly, confirming her familiarity with the place. Initially, he had thought the restaurant was unremarkable, but upon closer inspection, he found it quite charming. They walked across the room until the man opened a door leading to a private area in the back. Inside was a table surrounded by 4 chairs, and they took their seats as the man returned to the main dining area. He looked around the room, puzzled, and inquired why they were seated in the private area. She explained that she could be quite loud, and some patrons preferred a quieter dining experience. She chuckled, adding that certain places provided special rooms for her to avoid disturbing others. He raised an eyebrow, unsure if she was serious, but she playfully admitted that while it might be partly true, her friendship with the owners allowed her this privilege. As he glanced at the menu, he was surprised by its simplicity. She encouraged him, assuring him that the food was fantastic, even getting a nod of approval from 𝐒𝐿, who was notoriously hard to please. Curious about her relationship with 𝐒𝐿, he asked how they had gotten together, noting their apparent differences. She rested her chin on her hands, explaining that while they seemed like opposites, they shared many similarities. She reminisced about their first meeting, describing him as strong and confident, standing out in a crowd. Initially, they had clashed, but circumstances forced them to work together. Eventually, they lost touch when he switched to an overnight shift, but fate intervened one night when she encountered trouble, and 𝐒𝐿 appeared to help her. This led to their reconnection and a blossoming friendship. Skeptical, he questioned the authenticity of her story, suggesting he had heard more compelling tales on television. She acknowledged that while it might sound cliché, sometimes things happen for a reason. Then, she shifted the conversation, asking if there was a special girl in his life, smirking playfully. Feeling a bit anxious, he admitted that there was someone special. As he described her, a grin spread across his face. She was sweet and caring, making him feel better just by thinking of her. However, his smile faded as he recalled their first meeting in the park, which had been a coincidence. He chuckled nervously, recalling how he had felt upset that she was in his favorite spot. She teased him about love at first sight, but he dismissed the notion, explaining that he had been annoyed at first. When she asked if he had spoken to her, he admitted he had simply sat against a tree, lacking the confidence to approach her. 𝐼𝐻 burst into laughter, finding his choice amusing. He felt a bit embarrassed, acknowledging his awkwardness. Her eyes sparkled with determination as she promised to help him improve his social skills. Curious about what happened next, she urged him to continue. He shared that they had sat in silence until she invited him to join her on the bench. They began talking about music, enjoying each other's company until he eventually left. She looked at him incredulously, questioning why he hadn't asked for her number. He explained that he hadn't thought much of it at the time, viewing her as just another face in the crowd. However, fate had other plans, as he later ran into her at a music store, where they connected over guitar lessons. He recalled the fun they had until her father arrived, causing a scene. As he recounted the story, he noticed 𝐼𝐻's expression shift to one of concern, her protective instincts surfacing. He leaned back slightly, sensing her fierce determination to defend him from any perceived threat. It seemed that his wife and daughter had given him a hard time, which prompted a nervous chuckle from me. He was genuinely a nice guy, just very protective of his only daughter. She sighed and muttered to herself, deciding to let it slide this time. Sitting back up in her chair, she inquired about what happened next. A couple of months passed, and we unexpectedly crossed paths again at the music store. She had to stop me from leaving immediately, and I laughed at how anxious I had felt that day. She looked at me, puzzled, wondering why I would want to leave. I reminded her of our previous conversation, explaining that mixing all those feelings with my mind telling me she was upset with me for 2 months made me feel at fault. I took another sip of my drink, recalling that I was probably a bit hungover at the time. A cold chill ran down my spine as I realized what I had just revealed. 𝐼𝐻 raised an eyebrow, scrutinizing me. She asked about the mention of a hangover. I stammered, denying it and attempting to flash a confident smile, which clearly didn't work. She insisted we would revisit that topic later but wanted to hear the rest of the story for now. I swallowed my apprehension and continued. She had apologized for everything that had happened and began reteaching me guitar. Out of nowhere, her father appeared, also apologizing and inviting us to a music night that Friday. Afterward, we left for the park to talk more, and I chuckled, admitting she hadn't left me much choice. A few days later, on my way to the music store, I encountered trouble and ended up in the hospital, a detail she already knew. She nodded, reminding me that I hadn't mentioned it was on the way to a date. I clarified that it wasn't a date, or at least I didn't think it was. I scratched my head, but that was beside the point. Apparently, she had found Mr. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 with me in the alley and rode to the hospital with me. When her father picked her up, he left me a note asking me to call them once I was up. After several long conversations, I was discharged. I called them to let them know I made it home safely, and her father gave me her number, inviting me over for dinner. I leaned back in my chair, recalling that night as interesting. I shared more about myself than I ever expected, yet they treated me no differently, they accepted me. A tear formed in my eye as I wiped it away, reflecting on how we hung out a few times afterward, and she helped me pick out a guitar. I thought she would have liked her. She always made the same joke about being all ears whenever I asked her something. Her quirk made her hearing extremely sensitive. 𝐼𝐻 laughed at that. She expressed her eagerness to meet this girl, leaning in with interest. I looked down, admitting that it wouldn't happen. We had ended whatever we had when I left. Confused, she asked why, recalling that I had said she was the best thing to happen to me. I affirmed that she was, and still is, but it wouldn't be fair to her if I left to pursue my dream, knowing I wouldn't have time for her. I clenched my fist in my pocket, trying to maintain my composure. It was clear she didn't take the news well. She pondered whether it would be worth a shot, leaning back in her chair. I considered it, admitting that hindsight is always clearer. She regarded me for a moment, taking a deep breath before suggesting we change the topic. She remarked on how cool it was that I played music. As I explained the situation regarding the guitar I had bought, the waiter arrived to take our order. She lectured me on how fiscally irresponsible it was, but when I told her that every time I looked at it, I thought of her, she understood why I had left it behind. It was akin to someone discarding gifts from an ex to move on more quickly. The rest of our lunch conversation was uneventful, filled with discussions about music and potential future plans. After finishing our meal, Ms. Emmy glanced at her phone and sighed softly as she put it away. She noted that our time together had taken longer than expected but felt it was worthwhile. I agreed, expressing my gratitude as I finished my drink. She suggested we head out, playfully mentioning that 𝐲𝐬 might be worried I was being corrupted. I looked at her, puzzled by her choice of words. She explained that he preferred a more peaceful atmosphere and was likely concerned I would become like her. As we walked to the car, I remarked that I didn't think that was necessarily a bad thing. She seemed like a genuinely nice person who cared about others. Sure, she could be a bit over the top sometimes, but I didn't see that as inherently negative. Once in the car, she pretended to wipe away a tear, playfully saying I was making her feel like a proud mother with my compliments. I nervously chuckled, questioning if that was a bad thing. She assured me it wasn't, smiling as she drove us back to Mr. Izuku's house. Then, she brought up my earlier comment about calling her a proud mom. I looked out the window, explaining that in the moment, she reminded me of my mother from when I was little. Her hair smelled like hers and it felt safe. I admitted I got caught up in the moment. Sat in silence for a moment before I heard a soft sniffle from her side of the car. She expressed that I was making her emotional, but she found my words sweet. I apologized, nervously rubbing the back of my head. The atmosphere was light as 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐃𝐞𝐭 declared her new identity, insisting that from now on, she would be known as 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐃𝐞𝐭. She looked at him with a serious expression, making it clear she meant what she said. There would be no more Ms. Emmy unless the situation truly called for it. He was puzzled by her words and asked for clarification. She explained that as a professional hero and a teacher, she had different titles depending on the context. When on duty, she would be Ms. Joke, but around her students, she preferred to be called Ms. Fukakato. With a hint of disappointment, she added that 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐃𝐞𝐭 had a nice ring to it and provided a great setup for humor. A small smile crept onto his face as he teased her with the suggestion of calling her Mrs. Izuku. Suddenly, the car came to a halt, and she turned to him with an intense gaze, expressing her belief that they would get along perfectly. As they resumed their drive, he felt his heart race, still startled by the abrupt stop. He rested his head against the window, contemplating how Mr. Izuku would respond to the playful suggestion. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐃𝐞𝐭 remarked that 𝐲𝐬 would likely disapprove, but she thought it would be worth it. A mischievous smile spread across her face as she revealed she had a plan involving 𝐲𝐬. The remainder of the journey was filled with her animated explanation of the scheme, which, despite his reservations, sounded amusing. However, he couldn't shake the worry about how everything would unfold. Before long, they arrived at the front door. He felt her hand on his shoulder, and 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐃𝐞𝐭 flashed one of her signature smiles. Taking a deep breath, he opened the door to find Mr. Izuku seated on the couch with licorice. He greeted him casually, inquiring about the meeting. Mr. Izuku slowly turned his head, his eyes widening in surprise. He could hear 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐃𝐞𝐭 stifling her laughter, which only added to the tension in the air. She asked what Emmy had done to him, clearly amused by the unexpected situation.